They said she was nothing, a discarded bride, a broken woman with no future. But when Lyra Vance walked through the obsidian gates of the Bloodkeep, the fortress where even nobles fear to tread, she carried something more dangerous than any weapon: desperation sharpened into steel. The Alpha King ruled the northern frontier with absolute brutality. One wrong word and heads rolled. Yet here she stood, asking the impossible from a man who crushed empires before breakfast. What happened next would shake the entire territory to its core. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below. You won't believe where this goes. The guards at the Bloodkeep's outer gate didn't stop her. That should have been Lyra's first warning. They simply watched. Two massive warriors in black armor, faces hidden behind wolf skull helms, as she approached on foot. No carriage, no escort. Just a woman in a travel-stained dress walking up the volcanic stone road like she had every right to be there. "State your business," one finally growled. Lyra's throat was dry. She'd been walking since dawn, 3 hours through terrain that would make most nobles turn back within minutes. Her feet ached. Her stomach hadn't seen food since yesterday, but she kept her chin up. "I'm here to see the Alpha King." The guard's laugh was ugly. "You and everyone else, sweetheart. Move along before... Tell him Lyra Vance is here." Her voice cut through his dismissal. "Tell him I'm the woman Dorian Hale publicly rejected 4 days ago at the spring gala. Tell him I have a proposal that will solve his faction problem before the gathering." The guards went still. Everyone in the Northern Territory knew about the gathering, the annual summit where the 7 great houses met to negotiate, threaten, and occasionally murder each other in politically acceptable ways. It was 3 weeks out, and everyone knew Riven Kalor, the Alpha King, was under pressure from 3 different houses trying to marry their daughters into his bloodline. The second guard stepped closer. "If you're wasting his time, girl, they'll find pieces of you scattered across 3 provinces. Then I suggest you tell him quickly." She shouldn't have been this calm. Her hands were shaking, hidden in the folds of her dress, but her voice came out steady. 4 days ago, she'd been standing in the Moonstone Ballroom, surrounded by the territory's elite, while Dorian Hale, her fiancé of 2 years, announced he was breaking their engagement, not privately, not with dignity. In front of 300 witnesses, he'd called her disappointing, cold, and unsuited to be the wife of a future house leader. The whispers had started immediately. By morning, every gossip channel in the territory was running the story. Disgraced Vance girl cast aside. What did she do wrong? Sources say she couldn't perform basic marital duties. Lies, all of it. But truth didn't matter when reputation was currency. The guard muttered something into a communication device. Waited. His eyebrows rose. "He'll see you." He sounded surprised. "Third tower. Don't touch anything. Don't speak unless spoken to. And if you run, we're authorized to bring you back in pieces." Lyra walked through gates that had seen more blood than rainfall. What? The Bloodkeep wasn't a castle in the traditional sense. It was a military fortress carved into the side of an active volcano, all black stone and sharp angles, built 300 years ago when the northern frontier was still contested territory. Now it was the seat of power for the most dangerous man in 6 provinces. Lyra had never been here, never wanted to be. The stories about Riven Kalor were the kind parents told to make children behave. Eat your vegetables, or the Alpha King will hear about your disobedience. Sleep on time, or Riven Kalor will know you're weak. He'd taken control of the northern frontier at 23 after his father died in suspicious circumstances. In the 7 years since, he'd crushed 2 rebellion attempts, personally executed 11 house leaders who tried to undermine his authority, and built an intelligence network so thorough that people joked he knew what you were thinking before you did. He'd never married, never publicly courted anyone. The running theory was that he considered emotional attachment a weakness, and Riven Kalor didn't do weakness. The guard led her through corridors that smelled like weapon oil and old smoke. Other warriors passed them, all huge, all watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. One woman with a scarred face actually laughed. "Fresh meat," she called out. "How long you think this one lasts?" "Hour tops," another responded. Lyra kept walking. They climbed stairs. Lots of stairs. By the time they reached the 3rd tower, her legs were burning and sweat was cooling on her back despite the volcanic heat. The guard stopped at a massive door made of ironwood reinforced with steel. "He's inside." Knock once. Enter when he responds. And girl? His voice dropped. Whatever you think you know about survival, forget it. Different rules apply here. He left her alone. Lyra stood in front of that door for 30 seconds, working up the courage. Everything she'd heard about Riven Kalor said this was insane. That walking in there with a request was like juggling knives in a windstorm. Eventually, you'd get cut. But her alternatives were worse. She knocked. Come. The voice was deep, textured with authority that didn't need volume to command. Lyra pushed the door open and stepped into the war room of the most powerful predator in the Northern Territory. The space was larger than expected, circular, with windows offering views of the surrounding mountains. Maps covered one wall, territory breakdowns marked with flags and notes in handwriting so precise it looked printed. Weapons hung on another wall, not decorative pieces but working blades that had seen use. A massive desk dominated the center, covered in reports and correspondence. And behind that desk sat Riven Kalor. He was not what she expected. The stories made him sound like a monster, all scars and rage. The reality was somehow worse because it was so controlled. He was tall, she could tell even seated, with the kind of build that came from actual combat, not decorative training. Dark hair pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and harder edges. His eyes were gray, the color of winter storms, and they assessed her with the focus of something that had decided whether you lived or died 1,000 times before. He wore simple clothes, black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. No jewelry, no crown or symbols of office. He didn't need them. Lyra Vance. He said her name like he was tasting it, deciding if it was poison. The disgraced bride. I heard about Dorian Hale's performance at the gala. Quite the spectacle. I'm sure it was entertaining for everyone watching. She hated how small her voice sounded, forced steel into it. I didn't come here to discuss my humiliation. No? Riven leaned back in his chair, still watching her with that unnerving intensity. Then why are you here? My guard mentioned something about the gathering and my faction problem. Explain. This was it. The moment where she either secured her future or signed her death warrant. You're being pressured by the Sinclair, Morgrave, and Torin houses to marry one of their daughters, Lyra said. Each one is playing political games, using their council votes as leverage. If you choose one, you alienate the other two. If you choose none, they'll form an alliance against you before the gathering. Riven's expression didn't change. You traveled 3 hours through dangerous terrain to tell me something I already know? No. I came to offer you a solution. Lyra's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. I need to attend Dorian Hale's wedding in 9 days. The wedding where I was supposed to be the bride. If I show up alone, I'll be torn apart by the gossip. But if I show up with you, stop! Riven held up one hand. The word wasn't loud, but it hit like a physical force. You want me to be your escort to your ex-fiance's wedding? That's your proposal? It solves both our problems. If you appear to be courting someone, the houses back off temporarily. They can't push their daughters if you're already showing interest elsewhere. And her voice cracked slightly, forced herself to continue. I get to walk into that wedding with my head up instead of being the pitied, discarded failure everyone expects. Silence filled the room. Riven stood. He was taller than she'd estimated, easily 6'4", with the kind of presence that made the space feel smaller. He walked around the desk, each step deliberate, until he was standing directly in front of her. This close, Lyra could see the scars. One across his left eyebrow, another along his jaw. His hands, when he crossed his arms, showed old burns and blade marks. This was a man who'd earned his position through violence, not birthright. You have courage, he said finally, or stupidity. I haven't decided which. Probably both. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Do you understand what you're asking? The 7 houses watch my every move. If I show up at a minor house wedding with an unknown woman, they'll investigate every aspect of your life. They'll look for weakness, scandal, anything they can use as ammunition. Your humiliation at the gala will look like a pleasant afternoon compared to what they'll do. I'm already destroyed. The words came out harder than she intended. Dorian made sure of that. At least this way I control the narrative. I'm not the woman who got discarded. I'm the woman who moved on to something better. To me. Yes. Riven studied her for a long moment. What makes you think I'm better? You're the Alpha King. By definition, you're the pinnacle. That's not an answer. That's flattery. He circled her slowly, like a predator examining prey. Let me tell you what I see. A desperate woman with no allies, no resources, and a reputation in tatters. You're offering me a political convenience in exchange for social rehabilitation. But here's the problem. I don't need you. I can solve my faction problem 10 different ways without involving some disgraced noble's daughter. So I'll ask again, why should I agree to this? Lyra turned to keep him in her line of sight. Because all 10 of your other solutions involve long-term commitment or violence. This is clean, temporary, 9 days of pretending, 1 public appearance, and then we part ways. You get breathing room before the gathering. I get dignity. Neither of us owes the other anything afterward. And if I say no, then I leave and you never see me again. Wrong. Riven stopped directly in front of her again. If you leave here after proposing this plan, I'll have to ensure you don't discuss our conversation with anyone. Ever. Do you understand what that means? The threat was clear. Lyra's mouth went dry, but she held his gaze. I understand, but you won't kill me. Bold assumption. You would have done it already. The moment I mentioned the gathering, you started calculating. I saw it. You're a strategist, not a butcher. If you were going to eliminate me as a security risk, I'd already be dead. She took a breath. So either agree to my proposal or tell me no and let me walk out. But don't waste both our time with threats you won't follow through on. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Riven laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like he'd surprised himself. You're either the bravest person I've met this year or the most suicidal. I genuinely can't tell. Does it matter? Not particularly. He walked back to his desk, picked up a glass of something amber, and downed it in one swallow. I'm going to make you a counteroffer, Lyra Vance. And I want you to think very carefully before you respond, because once you agree, there's no backing out. Her stomach tightened. What kind of counteroffer? Riven set down the glass with deliberate care. I don't do half measures. If we're going to solve our respective problems, we do it properly. Not as a courtship, as a marriage. The room tilted. What? A temporary marriage, Riven clarified. Legally binding, publicly announced, lasting exactly 6 months. Long enough to get through the gathering and into the winter season, short enough to dissolve without excessive scandal. It solves my faction problem completely. I'm off the marriage market, the houses can't leverage their daughters, and I control the narrative. And it solves yours better than showing up at a wedding on my arm. You don't become the woman who found a new escort. You become the woman who married the Alpha King. Lyra's mind was racing. That's insane. Is it? You came here asking for a favor that would draw attention and speculation. I'm offering you something that eliminates all questions. We announce the marriage tomorrow. Hold a small ceremony within the week. You attend Dorian Hale's wedding as my wife, not my date. The difference in impact is astronomical. And after 6 months, we divorce quietly. Cite incompatibility. By then, the gathering will be over. You'll have had half a year to rebuild your reputation, and both our problems are solved. I'll draw up a contract outlining every detail, financial arrangements, public behavior expectations, dissolution terms, everything legal and clear. Lyra struggled to process this. Why would you offer marriage instead of just escorting me to one event? Because I'm practical. Riven's gray eyes were unreadable. If I'm going to invest time and political capital in this arrangement, I'm going to get maximum return. A single appearance at a minor wedding does nothing for me. A marriage, even a temporary one, neutralizes 3 different house factions, lets me control the narrative around my personal life, and gives me a legitimate excuse to decline every marriage proposal until I'm ready to actually choose. It's efficient. And what do I have to do in return? Learn to survive in my world. Riven's voice hardened. This isn't the social circles you're used to, Lyra. The people I deal with will eat you alive if you show weakness. For the next 6 months, you'll train with my staff, learn our protocols, and present yourself as someone worthy of standing beside me. I don't need you to be perfect, but I need you to be strong enough that no one questions why I chose you. That's a lot. Yes. Which is why you're going to take exactly 5 minutes to think about it. Not longer, not shorter. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, and I need your answer before I walk out that door. He gestured to a chair. Sit. Think. Decide. Lyra sank into the chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. Marriage. To the Alpha King. For 6 months. It was insane. Reckless. The kind of decision that could ruin her life even more thoroughly than Dorian had managed. But what was the alternative? Go home to her family's estate, where her parents were already discussing damage control and suitable matches with lower-tier houses? Attend Dorian's wedding alone and endure the pitying stares and whispered gossip? Spend the next year, maybe longer, trying to rebuild a reputation that had been destroyed in one public moment? Or take this gamble? Marry the most powerful man in 6 provinces. Spend 6 months learning to survive in the most brutal political environment in the territory. And walk out the other side as someone completely different. The woman who'd walked into the Blood Keep was broken, desperate, powerless. But the woman who married Riven Kaler? That woman would be someone else entirely. Lyra looked up. Riven was watching her, patient and predatory at once. I have questions, she said. You have 3 minutes left. The marriage is in name only? No. Expectations beyond public appearances? Correct. You'll have your own quarters. I have no interest in forcing intimacy, physical or otherwise. What we show the public is performance. What happens in private is professional courtesy. And the contract covers everything? Financial terms, behavioral expectations, exit conditions? Every word. My lawyers don't leave loopholes. What if I fail? What if I can't meet your standards for public presentation? For the first time, something that might have been respect flickered in Riven's expression. Then we'll have a problem, but I don't think you will. You walked into my fortress alone with nothing but a plan and nerve. That's not the action of someone who gives up easily. Lyra's 2 minutes were probably up. She stood, extended her hand. I accept your counteroffer. 6 months, temporary marriage, legal contract with all terms clearly defined. Riven looked at her hand for a moment. Then he took it. His grip was firm, calloused, and warm. Welcome to the Blood Keep, future Mrs. Kaler. Try not to die in the next 9 days. I'll do my best. He released her hand. My assistant will show you to your quarters. You'll meet with legal at dawn to review the contract. After that, we begin your training. Any questions? Just one. Lyra met his gaze directly. Why did you really agree to this? The strategic reasons make sense, but you could have thrown me out. Instead, you escalated. Why? Riven smiled. It wasn't a comforting expression, because everyone who knows me thinks I'm predictable, ruthless, strategic. They think they understand how I operate. He walked to the window, looking out over the volcanic landscape. Announcing a marriage to a complete unknown, someone with no political connections or obvious value? It's chaos. And chaos makes people reveal their true intentions. When the 7 houses start scrambling to figure out why I chose you, they'll make mistakes, and I'll exploit every single one. So I'm bait. You're an investment with potentially high returns. He glanced back at her. Don't look so offended. You came here to use me for social rehabilitation. I'm using you for political advantage. We both get what we need. That's the bargain. Fair enough? One more thing. Riven's voice dropped to something harder. The moment you agreed, you became part of my world. That means enemies, political, personal, and otherwise. Some will target you to get to me. Others will target you because you're weak and they enjoy breaking weak things. My guards will protect you from physical threats, but social attacks? You handle those yourself. Understood? Lyra nodded, even though her heart was racing again. Good. Now get out. Dawn comes early, and you have a lot to learn before you become my wife. She turned toward the door. Lyra. She looked back. Riven was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You asked why I agreed. Here's the real reason. You walked in here expecting me to either help you or kill you. You didn't flinch, didn't beg, just made your case and waited for judgment. He paused. That takes either stupidity or steel, and I'm betting on steel. Don't make me regret it. I won't. We'll see. The quarters they assigned her were nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived. That was Lyra's first coherent thought after the assistant, a severe woman named Kestrel, who spoke in clipped sentences, deposited her in a suite on the eastern side of the keep. The space was massive. Sitting room with a fireplace, separate bedroom, private bathroom with a tub large enough to drown in. The furniture was simple but expensive, all dark wood and clean lines. Your belongings will arrive tomorrow, Kestrel said, checking something on a tablet. The Alpha King authorized basic necessities for tonight. Clothing in the wardrobe, toiletries in the bathroom. Dinner is delivered at sunset. Don't leave these rooms without escort. Questions? What time is the legal meeting? Dawn. Someone will collect you. Kestrel's dark eyes swept over Lyra with clinical assessment. You should rest. Tomorrow begins your education, and it won't be gentle. I didn't expect gentle. Good. Manage your expectations now, and you'll suffer less later. Kestrel turned to leave, then paused. One piece of advice, since you're new. Don't trust anyone here, not the staff, not the guards, not even the Alpha King. Everyone has agendas. The moment you forget that, you're dead. Cheerful. Realistic. Kestrel left without another word. Lyra stood in the middle of the suite, trying to process the last 2 hours. She'd come here with a simple plan. Get Riven to escort her to Dorian's wedding, salvage her dignity, move on with her life. Instead, she'd somehow agreed to marry the most dangerous man in the Northern Territory. For 6 months. Starting immediately. Her hands were shaking now that she was alone. Lyra forced herself to breathe slowly, counting the inhales. This was fine. This was manageable. She'd made a strategic decision based on the options available. The fact that it was completely insane didn't matter. Insane was better than broken. She walked to the window. From here, she could see the training grounds below, warriors running drills even as the sun set, moving with synchronized precision that spoke of brutal discipline. Beyond that, the volcanic mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. This was her world now. For the next 6 months. Lyra pressed her forehead against the cool glass. What did you just do? She whispered to her reflection. Her reflection didn't answer, but somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the fear and uncertainty, something else stirred. Something that felt almost like hope. Because for the first time in 4 days, she wasn't powerless. She was the woman who'd walked into the Bloodkeep and walked out with a deal. And in 9 days, she'd walk into Dorian Hale's wedding as the Alpha King's wife. Let them try to pity her then. Dinner arrived as promised. Roasted meat, vegetables, bread that was still warm. Lyra ate mechanically, barely tasting it. Her mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow. The contract review, the training Riven had mentioned, whatever education Kestrel had hinted at. She bathed, scrubbing away 3 hours of travel dirt, and found sleeping clothes in the wardrobe exactly as Kestrel had promised. Everything fit perfectly, which meant someone had very accurately guessed her measurements. That should have been creepy. Instead, it was just efficient. Lyra climbed into bed, massive, comfortable, with sheets softer than anything she'd owned, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Riven's gray stare, heard his voice saying, "Welcome to the Bloodkeep," saw the scars on his hands, the weapons on his wall, the absolute control in every movement. She'd bargained with a predator and won. Or had she? 6 months, Lyra whispered into the darkness. You can survive anything for 6 months. But surviving wasn't the same as winning. And somewhere between agreeing to this marriage and lying in this bed, she'd realized something important. She didn't just want to survive the next 6 months. She wanted to walk out of this arrangement stronger than she'd walked in. She wanted to become the kind of person who didn't need rescuing, the kind of person who could stand in a room full of predators and not flinch, the kind of person who deserved to be called the Alpha King's wife, even if it was only temporary. Lyra rolled onto her side, looking at the dying embers in the fireplace. Let's see what you're made of, she told herself. Tomorrow, the real test began. Dawn at the Bloodkeep meant being dragged from sleep by pounding on the door at an hour when even the sun hadn't bothered to show up yet. Lyra jerked awake, disoriented, her heart hammering. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was wrong, the bed was wrong. Everything smelled like volcanic stone and weapon oil instead of the lavender sachets her mother kept in every room back home. Then memory crashed back, the bargain, the counteroffer, the marriage contract waiting for her signature. 5 minutes, Kestrel's voice came through the door. Legal doesn't wait. Lyra stumbled out of bed, splashed cold water on her face, and threw on the clothes laid out on a chair. Simple dark pants and a tunic that fit like they'd been made for her. Which they probably had been. This place was unsettlingly efficient. Kestrel was waiting in the corridor, holding a cup of something that smelled like burnt earth. "Drink this, you'll need it." Lyra took the cup. The liquid was black and bitter enough to strip paint. "What is it?" "Coffee, volcanic blend. Keeps the warriors awake during 72-hour shifts." Kestrel started walking without checking if Lyra was following. "You'll learn to like it, or you'll learn to function without sleep. Either way works." The legal offices were in the central tower, 3 floors down from Riven's war room. The space was all dark wood and shelves packed with documents, lit by oil lamps that cast everything in amber. A man sat behind a desk that looked older than the keep itself, thin, pale, with wire-rimmed glasses and hands covered in ink stains. "Miss Vance?" He didn't stand. "I'm Aldrich Thorne, senior legal counsel for the Alpha King. Sit." Lyra sat. Aldrich slid a document across the desk. It had to be 40 pages, dense text in 2 columns, with tabs marking different sections. "Your marriage contract. I'll give you the summary version since we're on a schedule. Section 1 covers the duration, 6 months from date of signing, renewable only by mutual written consent. Section 2 covers financial arrangements. You receive a monthly stipend, access to household accounts for approved purchases, and a lump sum settlement upon dissolution. Section 3 covers public behavior expectations." "Wait." Lyra held up a hand. "How much is the settlement?" Aldrich's expression didn't change. 200,000 marks. The number hit her like cold water. That was more money than her family saw in 3 years. "That's excessive. That's standard for someone who marries into the Alpha King's household, even temporarily. Consider it compensation for the disruption to your life and the political scrutiny you'll endure." Aldrich tapped the document. "Section 3. You will present as a unified front in all public settings. No contradicting the Alpha King, no independent political statements. No behavior that undermines his authority. Section 4 covers private arrangements. Separate quarters, no expectation of physical intimacy. Mutual respect for personal boundaries. Section 5. Details grounds for early termination, treason, betrayal of confidential information, or actions that directly threaten the security of the Northern Territory." Lyra skimmed the pages. The language was dense, but clear. Everything Riven had promised was there, written in binding legal terms. No hidden clauses, no traps she could see. "And if I sign this, then you become legally bound to Riven Kylor for 6 months. The ceremony is scheduled for 5 days from now. Small, private, official witnesses only. The public announcement goes out tomorrow morning." Aldrich pushed a pen across the desk. "I need your signature on pages 1, 15, 23, and 40. You have 30 minutes to read the full document if you want. After that, I have other appointments." Lyra picked up the pen. Her hand was steadier than she expected. She'd gambled everything on walking into the Bloodkeep yesterday. Signing this contract was just the next logical step. And yet her mind kept snagging on one thing. This was real. Not a daydream or a desperate fantasy. In 5 days, she would legally marry Riven Kylor. For 6 months, her life would belong to this fortress, these rules, this brutal world. "Question," she said. Aldrich sighed. "Yes? What happens if I fail? If I can't meet the public behavior standards, or if I embarrass him somehow? That's covered in Section 5, subsection C. If your actions bring significant reputational harm to the Alpha King, he can initiate early termination. However," Aldrich's sharp eyes fixed on her, "that clause requires proof of intent or gross negligence. Simple mistakes or learning errors don't qualify. The Alpha King is many things, but he's not unreasonable. He understands you're entering an unfamiliar environment." "That's almost comforting." "Don't get used to comfort here. It's in short supply." Aldrich tapped the contract again. "Sign or don't. Decide." Lyra signed all 4 pages. Her handwriting looked small and uncertain next to the printed text, but it was done. Binding. Real. Aldrich collected the pages, added them to a folder, and stood. "Congratulations, future Mrs. Kaler. Report to the training grounds at 700 hours. Don't be late." The training grounds were exactly as brutal as they'd looked from her window. Lyra arrived at 700 hours. She'd learned quickly that military time was the only time anyone here recognized, to find 30 warriors in the middle of combat drills. They moved in synchronized patterns, armed with practice weapons that still looked deadly. Their coordination so precise it was almost beautiful. Almost. There was nothing beautiful about the violence underlying every movement. "You're the new one." Lyra turned. A woman approached from the equipment shed, tall, built like she could break concrete with her bare hands, with short red hair and a scar running from her temple to her jaw. She wore the same black training gear as everyone else, but the way the other warriors deferred to her said she was in charge. "Lyra Vance, I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are. I'm Commander Thessa Kane, head of Alpha King's personal guard." Thessa looked her up and down with an expression that said she wasn't impressed. "You're here because the Alpha King wants you trained in basic survival skills before the wedding. That gives me 5 days to turn you from a liability into something marginally less useless. Fun. I can handle it. We'll see." Thessa jerked her head toward the training area. "First rule, nobody here cares about your feelings. You fall down, you get up. You fail a drill, you run it again. You complain, you run laps until you vomit. This isn't a social club. It's preparation for staying alive in a world that wants you dead. Understood?" "Understood." "Good. Strip your jacket. We start with basics." The next 2 hours were hell. Thessa ran her through conditioning exercises that left Lyra's muscles screaming, burpees, mountain climbers, sprints across the grounds and back. Every time she slowed down, Thessa was there with a sharp comment. "Faster. Your enemies won't wait for you to catch your breath." When Lyra finally collapsed after the 10th sprint, gasping for air, Thessa stood over her with arms crossed. Pathetic, but expected. "You've never done real physical training, have you?" Lyra couldn't answer. Her lungs were on fire. "Thought so. Rich girls don't build endurance. They learn to dance and smile and look pretty for marriage prospects." Thessa crouched down. "Here's the problem, Vance. The moment you marry the Alpha King, you become a target. Political rivals will come after you to get to him. Some will use words, others will use blades. I need you strong enough to survive both." "I'll get stronger." "You will, if you want to live." Thessa hauled her to her feet. "Water break, 5 minutes. Then we work on awareness." Awareness training turned out to be even worse than conditioning. Thessa blindfolded her and had 3 warriors attack from random directions with padded weapons. The first strike caught Lyra in the ribs, knocking the air out of her lungs. The second hit her shoulder. By the 5th round, she was covered in bruises and completely disoriented. "Again," Thessa ordered. "I can't." "Wrong answer. Again." Lyra gritted her teeth and reset her stance. The blindfold made everything worse. She could hear footsteps but couldn't tell distances, couldn't predict angles. Another strike hit her thigh. She stumbled, caught herself, and tried to dodge the next one based purely on sound. She still got hit, but this time she managed to partially deflect it with her arm. "Better," Thessa said. Again. By the time Thessa finally called a halt, Lyra was shaking with exhaustion. Her entire body ached. Sweat soaked through her clothes, but she'd completed every drill without quitting, even when her body screamed for her to stop. Thessa pulled off the blindfold. "Adequate. You didn't cry, and you didn't give up. That's more than most nobles manage on day 1. High praise. Don't get cocky. This was the easy part." Thessa handed her a water flask. "Tomorrow we add weapons training. Day 3 is tactical thinking. Day 4 is public presentation and crisis management. Day 5 is the ceremony, and then the real work begins. Questions?" Lyra drank half the flask in one go. "Why are you doing this? Training me, I mean. You clearly think I'm useless. Because the Alpha King ordered it, and because—" Thessa paused, something almost like respect flickering across her scarred face. "You walked into the Blood Keep alone and came out with a marriage contract. That takes guts or insanity. Either way, it means you're not completely hopeless. I've seen warriors with less nerve than you showed yesterday." "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me since I got here." "Enjoy it. It won't happen again." Thessa pointed toward the main building. "Go. Eat something. Rest. Be back here at 1400 hours for round 2. Lyra limped away from the training grounds, feeling like she'd been hit by a rolling boulder. Every muscle protested. Her bruises had bruises. But underneath the pain was something else. a strange sense of accomplishment. She'd survived. She was halfway to her quarters when a voice stopped her cold. Well, well, the disgraced bride herself. Lyra turned. 3 women stood blocking the corridor. They wore expensive clothes, silk and fine wool, with jewelry that caught the lamplight. Nobles, clearly, though Lyra didn't recognize them. The one in the center was striking, with platinum blonde hair and eyes like blue ice. I'm sorry, do I know you? The blonde smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Seraphine Sinclair, and these are my cousins, Mara and Elise. We're here visiting the Alpha King on behalf of House Sinclair. You know, one of the 3 great houses currently being inconvenienced by your sudden engagement. Ah, one of the rival houses Riven had mentioned, the ones pressuring him to marry their daughters. Then I'm sure you understand this is politics, not personal, Lyra said carefully. Oh, it's very personal. Seraphine stepped closer, her smile sharpening. You're a nobody, a girl from a minor house with no connections, no power, and a reputation so damaged that Dorian Hale publicly humiliated you in front of the entire territory. And somehow, you convinced the Alpha King to marry you. She tilted her head. How did you manage that? What did you offer him that we couldn't? That's between me and my fiancé. Your fiancé? Mara laughed, the sound cruel. You actually think he cares about you? This is a political move, sweetheart. You're a prop. A temporary inconvenience he'll discard the moment you're no longer useful. Maybe. But I'm still the one he's marrying, not you. Seraphine's expression went cold. Enjoy it while it lasts. Because the moment you slip up, and you will slip up, we'll be there to remind everyone exactly what you are. A desperate, discarded failure who got lucky once and will crash even harder the second time. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Seraphine leaned in close enough that Lyra could smell her perfume, expensive, cloying. You don't belong here. You're out of your depth in waters full of predators, and the only reason you're still afloat is because the Alpha King finds you temporarily amusing. But amusement fades, and when it does, we'll be waiting. The 3 women swept past, their laughter echoing down the corridor. Lyra stood there, hands clenched into fists, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and fear. Seraphine was right about one thing. She was out of her depth. These women had been raised in this world, trained from birth to navigate political warfare. Lyra was a newcomer stumbling through with nothing but nerve and a contract. But she'd signed that contract, made her choice, and she'd be damned if she let some blonde viper scare her away now. Lunch was delivered to her quarters. More roasted meat, bread, vegetables that tasted like ash in her mouth because her mind was still replaying the confrontation. Lyra forced herself to eat anyway. Thessa had made it clear that afternoon training would be just as brutal as the morning session, and she needed fuel. She was finishing the last of the bread when someone knocked on her door. Not the pounding summons from this morning, but a polite, measured knock. Come in, Riven entered. He looked different in daylight, somehow larger in her small sitting room. He'd changed from whatever he'd been wearing earlier to simple training gear similar to what the warriors wore, all black fabric that emphasized the lean muscle underneath. His gray eyes swept the room, cataloging everything in seconds before settling on her. You survived the morning. Barely. Thessa says you didn't quit. That's more than I expected. Riven crossed to the window, looking out at the grounds below. How are the bruises? Painful, plentiful, probably turning interesting colors as we speak. His mouth twitched. You'll have worse before the week is out, but you'll also have skills that most nobles never bother to learn. That's worth some bruises. Lyra set down her plate. I met Seraphine Sinclair in the hallway. She was welcoming. I'm sure she was. Riven didn't sound surprised. The Sinclair house arrived this morning. Unexpected visit, though I suspect my announcement yesterday about the engagement prompted it. What did she say? That I'm a temporary prop you'll discard when I'm no longer useful. That I don't belong here and I'll crash harder the second time I fail. Lyra kept her voice level. She's probably right. About which part? All of it. Riven turned from the window. She's right that this is political. Wrong about everything else. You're not a prop, Lyra. Props don't require 6 months of legal contracts and training programs, and you won't fail unless you give up, which, based on this morning, doesn't seem to be your style. You sound very confident. I'm a good judge of character. It's kept me alive this long. He moved closer, studying her with that same intense focus from yesterday. The Sinclair house will push. So will the Moregraves and the Torrens. They'll test you, try to find weaknesses, look for reasons to prove you're unworthy. That's expected. What matters is how you respond. Any advice? Don't defend yourself. The moment you start explaining or justifying, you've already lost. Instead, ignore them completely. Act like their opinions are irrelevant background noise. Riven's voice hardened. You're going to be my wife. That makes you untouchable. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me, and I don't tolerate disrespect. The certainty in his words sent something warm through Lyra's chest, which was stupid because this was all strategy. Performance. He'd said so himself. I'll try to remember that when they're circling like sharks. Good, because tomorrow gets harder. Riven headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. The public announcement goes out this evening. By tomorrow morning, everyone in the Northern Territory will know we're engaged. That means press, speculation, and probably some very creative conspiracy theories. Kestrel will brief you on media protocols after your afternoon training. Pay attention. The wrong comment to the wrong reporter can cause significant damage. Understood. And Lyra? He looked back at her. Seraphine was wrong about one thing. You do belong here. You walked through my gates and made a deal that benefits us both. That takes intelligence and courage. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. He left before she could respond. Lyra sat in the sudden silence, processing his words. They shouldn't have mattered this much. This was a business arrangement, a temporary marriage with clear terms and an expiration date. But the way he defended her, casually, certainly, like it was obvious, made something shift in her chest. She shook her head. Dangerous thinking. Riven was a strategist playing a long game. Everything he said and did served a purpose. Getting emotionally invested in his words was a fast track to getting hurt. She had 5 days to prepare for a wedding, 6 months to survive in this world. Feelings weren't part of the contract. Afternoon training was weapons work. Thessa handed her a practice blade, wooden, weighted, with a balance that felt completely wrong in Lyra's unpracticed hands. Basic stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees bent, blade at 45 degrees. Keep your weight on the balls of your feet, not your heels. If you're flat-footed, you're dead. Lyra adjusted her stance. The position felt awkward, exposed. Good. Now hold that for 10 minutes without moving. What? You heard me? Stance training builds muscle memory and endurance. Move before the time is up and we start over. 10 minutes sounded easy. It wasn't. By minute 3, Lyra's thighs were burning. By minute 6, her arms were shaking. By minute 9, she was seriously considering whether dropping the blade and accepting defeat was worth it. 30 seconds, Thessa said. Breathe through it. Lyra gritted her teeth and held the position. Her entire body was screaming. Sweat dripped into her eyes, but she held. Time. Release. Lyra dropped the stance and nearly collapsed. Her legs felt like water. Again. Are you serious? Completely. Again. They ran the drill 6 more times. By the end, Lyra could hold the stance for 10 minutes without shaking, though it still hurt like hell. Then Thessa moved her into basic strikes. Overhead, diagonal, thrust. Simple movements repeated hundreds of times until Lyra's arms were numb and her form was sloppy from exhaustion. That's enough for today. Thessa took the practice blade. You're terrible, but you're improving faster than expected. Tomorrow, we add defensive work. Go clean up. Media briefing in 1 hour. Lyra stumbled back to her quarters in a haze of pain and fatigue. A bath had been drawn, the water hot, scented with something that smelled like pine. She sank into it gratefully, letting the heat work on her abused muscles. The media briefing turned out to be Kestrel sitting across from her with a tablet, running through scenarios at rapid-fire pace. Reporter asks how you met the Alpha King. What do you say? We met through mutual acquaintances? Wrong. Too vague. Creates speculation. Correct answer? We were introduced recently and discovered a strong mutual connection. Short, definitive, gives nothing away. Next, reporter asks about your previous engagement to Dorian Hale. What do you say? That it ended and I've moved on? Better, but add conviction. That relationship ended and I'm focused on my future now. No emotion, no elaboration. Next, Reporter asks if this is a political marriage. What do you say? Lyra hesitated. The truth? Kestrel's expression went flat. The truth is complicated and none of their business. Correct answer, our relationship is personal, and we're very happy together. Then smile and move to the next question. The key is giving answers that sound complete but reveal nothing useful. They ran through 20 more scenarios. Questions about the wedding, about her plans as the Alpha King's wife, about House Sinclair's reaction, about her family's opinion. For each one, Kestrel had a scripted response that sounded natural but was carefully designed to deflect. You're a quick study, Kestrel admitted after an hour. Most people need 3 sessions to get the basics. You've got it in 1. Survival instinct. Works well here. Kestrel stood. The announcement goes live in 30 minutes. After that, you're public property. Every move you make will be analyzed, criticized, and dissected by people who've never met you but feel entitled to opinions about your life. Welcome to visibility. The announcement was simple. A formal statement from the Alpha King's office declaring his engagement to Lyra Vance with a small ceremony scheduled for 5 days hence. It included a photo, professional, recent, showing Riven in formal attire looking every inch the powerful ruler he was. Lyra wasn't in the photo. The statement explained she'd requested privacy during the transition, which apparently was normal for engagements involving the Alpha King's household. The reaction was immediate and explosive. By morning, every gossip channel, news outlet, and social media platform in the Northern Territory was running the story. Alpha King to wed unknown woman. Who is Lyra Vance? Shocking engagement rocks political landscape. Lyra watched it unfold from her quarters, scrolling through headlines on a tablet Kestrel had provided. The commentary ranged from curious to vicious. Some outlets focused on the political implications, how this affected the 3 great houses, what it meant for the gathering. Others dug into her past, finding the Dorian Hales scandal and running breathless speculation about whether she was using the Alpha King for rehabilitation. One particular gossip site had a field day. From disgraced bride to Alpha Queen, inside Lyra Vance's meteoric rise or calculated manipulation. The comments were worse. Strangers who'd never met her felt entitled to savage opinions. She's obviously a gold digger. Poor thing, she has no idea what she's getting into. The Alpha King can do so much better. This will end in disaster. Lyra closed the tablet and set it aside. This was part of the deal. Public scrutiny, invasive speculation, brutal commentary. She'd known it was coming. Knowing didn't make it easier to stomach. A knock on her door interrupted her spiral. Come in. Riven entered, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of something amber. You've seen the news. Hard to miss it. And people think I'm either a calculating social climber or a naive fool headed for disaster, sometimes both in the same comment. Riven poured 2 drinks and handed her one. Both theories will persist for months. Let them. What matters is what we know, not what strangers speculate. Lyra took the glass. The liquid smelled strong. Which is that this arrangement benefits us both. That you're stronger than they think. And that by the time this is over, those same people calling you a gold digger will be analyzing every move you make for political significance. He raised his glass. To strategic partnerships and the people too stupid to recognize them. Lyra clinked her glass against his. The drink burned going down, but it settled something jagged in her chest. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Riven said, Thessa tells me you're adapting faster than expected. Thessa thinks I'm terrible, but marginally less useless than yesterday. High praise from her. She doesn't train people she thinks are hopeless. Riven studied her with those unnerving gray eyes. You could have backed out. Even now, you could walk away. The contract has an early termination clause for both parties before the ceremony. Why haven't you? Lyra considered the question. The real answer was complicated. Pride, desperation, ambition, and something she couldn't quite name all tangled together. Because walking away means admitting everyone was right, she said finally. That I am the discarded, broken failure they think I am, and I'm tired of being that person. So become someone else. That's the plan. Riven's expression shifted, something that might have been approval. Then let them talk. Let them speculate and judge and predict your failure. And when you prove them wrong, it'll be that much sweeter. He finished his drink and stood. 3 more days until the ceremony. Thessa has a full schedule planned. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow involves politics. After he left, Lyra sat alone with her drink, staring at the fire. 3 more days. Then she'd be married to the most powerful man in the Northern Territory. And 9 days after that, she'd walk into Dorian Hale's wedding as the Alpha Queen. Let them try to pity her then. Day 3 brought political education. Aldrich, the legal counsel from the contract signing, turned out to also be a walking encyclopedia of the Northern Territory's political structure. He spent 4 hours drilling Lyra on the 7 great houses, their histories, current leadership, alliances, grudges, and pressure points. House Sinclair controls shipping and trade. Their power is economic, not military. They're allied with House Morgrave, who controls the eastern mines. Together, they represent 40% of the territory's wealth. Aldrich pointed to a complex chart showing interconnected relationships. House Torin controls agriculture and food distribution. They're neutral in most conflicts, but will side with whoever offers the best deal. Houses Blackwater and Rennick are military powers, old warrior families with more honor than sense. House Frost is intelligence and information, and House Valen, he paused. House Valen is dying. 3 generations of bad leadership left them with massive debt and no leverage. They're effectively powerless. And where does the Alpha King fit in all this? Above it, the Alpha King doesn't represent a house. He represents the territory itself. His power comes from controlling the military, the infrastructure, and having the final word on all interhouse disputes. But that power depends on maintaining balance. If enough houses unite against him, even the Alpha King can be challenged. Hence the marriage pressure from Sinclair, Morgrave, and Torin. Exactly. Each one wants their bloodline connected to the seat of power. Your engagement disrupted that game completely. They went through scenarios. What to say if House Sinclair tried to corner her at a social event, how to deflect political questions from House Frost's intelligence network, what topics to avoid with House Blackwater's notoriously violent leadership. By the time Aldrich dismissed her, Lyra's head was spinning with information. Afternoon brought Thessa again, this time with defensive drills. How to break a hold, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to identify exits in any room and calculate escape routes. You're not going to win a straight fight against trained warriors, Thessa explained, demonstrating a hold break on one of her subordinates. Your advantage is being underestimated. Use that. Make them think you're weak, then strike where they don't expect it. Survival isn't about honor. It's about living to fight another day. They practiced until Lyra could execute 3 different hold breaks without thinking. Her body was covered in new bruises, but the movements were becoming automatic. Better, Thessa said grudgingly. Tomorrow we put it all together. Ceremony is day after tomorrow, so this is your last full training session. That night, Lyra lay in bed too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion. The wedding was 48 hours away. Then 9 days until Dorian's ceremony. Everything was moving so fast. She'd been at the Blood Keep for 3 days and already felt like a different person. Stronger, yes, but also more aware of how dangerous this world was. Every conversation was layered with subtext. Every interaction was a potential trap, and she was navigating it with barely any experience. But she was navigating it. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but she hadn't crashed yet. That had to count for something. Day 4 was crisis management. Kestrel set up scenarios with brutal efficiency. You're at a formal dinner. Someone from House Morgrave implies you seduced the Alpha King for social advancement. What do? Lyra thought carefully. Smile. Say something like, how creative, and change the subject. Better answer, smile. Say, if that's what helps you sleep at night, and walk away. Don't give them the satisfaction of a real response. Next scenario? A reporter corners you, asks if you're pregnant. What do? Tell them it's none of their business? No, that sounds defensive. Correct answer. What an odd question. Then immediately turn to someone else and start a new conversation. Shut it down without engaging. Next, they ran 30 scenarios. By the end, Lyra could deflect, redirect, and neutralize hostile questions without even thinking. The afternoon brought something unexpected, dress fitting. 3 seamstresses descended on her quarters with fabric samples, measurement tools, and opinions. The wedding dress, they explained, would be simple but elegant. Northern tradition dictated strength over decoration. They measured every inch of her, arguing in technical terms about necklines and sleeve length and fabric weight. She needs to look powerful, not pretty, one argued. Powerful and pretty aren't mutually exclusive, another shot back. Ladies, the third interrupted, we have 12 hours to complete this. Focus. They finally settled on a design, fitted, long-sleeved, made from midnight blue fabric that looked black in low light but showed color in sun. No excessive decoration, just clean lines and perfect tailoring. When they showed her the sketch, Lyra felt something catch in her throat. She was really doing this. Tomorrow she would marry Riven Kalor. After the seamstresses left, Lyra stood at her window watching the sun set over the volcanic mountains. Tomorrow would change everything. 6 months from now, she'd walk out of this arrangement as someone completely different. If she survived. No. When she survived. A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in. Riven entered, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain, not afraid or weak, just thoughtful. Tomorrow is the ceremony, he said without preamble. After that, everything becomes official. Real. I wanted to make sure you understand what you're walking into. I signed a 40-page contract. I think I understand. The contract covers legalities. I'm talking about reality. Riven moved to the window beside her. Being my wife, even temporarily, means living with a target on your back. Political rivals who want to hurt me will come after you. Social predators who resent your position will try to tear you down. And that's just the external threats. Internal politics here are just as dangerous. People will test your loyalty, your strength, your worth, every single day. I know. Do you? He turned to face her fully. Because once we do this, there's no taking it back. 6 months minimum. Whatever happens, however hard it gets, we're bound to each other until the contract expires. Are you absolutely certain you can handle that? Lyra met his gray eyes without flinching. Are you certain you can? Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant respect. Fair question. Yes, I've survived worse than a temporary marriage to a woman I barely know. Then so have I. They stood there in the fading light, two strangers about to legally bind their lives together for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. Tomorrow, then, Riven said finally. Tomorrow. He left, and Lyra returned to the window. One more day. Then everything changed. The morning of the wedding, Lyra woke to find blood on her pillow. Not a lot, just a thin smear from where she'd bitten her lip during a nightmare she couldn't remember. She touched her mouth, winced at the split, and decided it was probably symbolic of something. Everything today felt like a metaphor she didn't have time to unpack. The seamstresses arrived before she'd finished breakfast, bringing the midnight blue dress and a protective covering. They worked in efficient silence, pinning her hair into something elegant and severe, applying minimal makeup that somehow made her look older, sharper. When they finally stepped back, Lyra barely recognized her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked like she belonged in the blood keep. No softness, no uncertainty, just clean lines and hard edges. You'll do, the head seamstress said, which Lyra had learned was high praise here. The ceremony was scheduled for noon in the keep's central hall, a space normally used for military briefings and territorial disputes. Kestrel appeared at 1100 hours to escort her down, her expression unreadable. Nervous? Terrified, Lyra admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Kestrel's heels clicked against stone as they descended the stairs. Small ceremony, like promised. Official witnesses only. The Alpha King, you, Aldrich to officiate, Thessa, and 2 other commanders as legal witnesses, and 1 representative from the Territorial Council. No family, no press, no spectacle. What about after? Public statement goes out immediately. Photo gets released tonight. Tomorrow the press will descend like locusts, but by then, you'll be legally protected as the Alpha King's wife. Different game. They reached the central hall. The doors were closed, 2 guards flanking them like statues. Kestrel stopped, turned to face her. Last chance to run. Lyra's heart was hammering, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not running. Then let's get you married. The doors opened. The hall was exactly as stark as she'd expected. Stone walls, high ceiling, minimal decoration except for the territorial banners hanging overhead. Riven stood at the far end in formal black attire that made him look even more dangerous than usual. Aldrich beside him, holding a leather-bound book. Thessa and two other commanders she didn't recognize stood to one side, an elderly man in council robes on the other. No music, no flowers, no pretense that this was anything other than a legal contract being formalized. Lyra walked forward, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Riven's gray eyes tracked her approach with that same intense focus, assessing, calculating. When she reached him, he offered his hand. She took it. His grip was warm, calloused, steady. Aldrich opened the book. We are gathered to formalize the marriage contract between Riven Kalor, Alpha King of the Northern Territory, and Lyra Vance, as witnessed by the Territorial Council and Military Command. This union is entered into with full legal authority and mutual consent. Do both parties confirm their understanding of the contract terms? Confirmed, Riven said. Confirmed, Lyra echoed. Riven Kalor, do you enter this marriage of your own free will and commit to uphold the terms as written? I do. Aldrich turned to her. Lyra Vance, do you enter this marriage of your own free will and commit to uphold the terms as written? This was it, the moment where everything became real and binding and irrevocable for the next 6 months. I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the Territorial Council and Northern Law, I pronounce you legally married. Duration, 6 months from this date, renewable only by mutual written consent. Aldrich closed the book with a decisive snap. Witnesses, confirm. Confirmed, Thessa said, along with the other commanders and the council representative. That was it. No kiss, no dramatic music, no throwing of rice or whatever traditional weddings involved. Just a legal formality completed in under 5 minutes. Riven released her hand. It's done. Yeah. Lyra's voice came out steadier than she felt. It's done. The witnesses approached with documentation, signatures required on multiple copies, official seals applied, everything duplicated for legal records. Lyra signed her new name for the first time, Lyra Kalor. The letters looked foreign, like they belonged to someone else. Congratulations, Aldrich said without emotion. You're now the Alpha King's legal wife. All rights, privileges, and dangers therein apply. Welcome to visibility. The council representative, a man with a face like weathered leather, studied her with open curiosity. Unconventional choice, Alpha King, but then you've never been predictable. Let's hope this gamble pays better than your father's. Careful, Morton. Riven's voice carried a warning edge. My wife is not a topic for speculation. Of course, apologies. But Morton's eyes stayed on Lyra. Still, the houses will react poorly. You know this. Let them. After the signing, Thessa pulled Lyra aside. Photos in 10 minutes. Kestrel will prep you. After that, you have 2 hours of freedom before the first official appearance as a married couple. Use it to rest. Tonight will be brutal. What's tonight? Welcome dinner. All 7 great houses sending representatives. Mandatory attendance, full formal protocol. Thessa's scarred face was grim. They'll test you. Push boundaries. Look for weakness. Remember your training. Don't give them anything. Lyra nodded, her stomach twisting. The photo session was mercifully quick. Professional photographer, minimal posing, just clean shots of them together that would satisfy public curiosity without revealing anything personal. Riven stood close enough that she could feel his body heat, but they didn't touch beyond what was necessary for the composition. Smile, the photographer instructed. Just a little. You're newlyweds, not prisoners. Debatable, Riven muttered, low enough that only Lyra heard. She bit back a laugh that would have been inappropriate and managed something that probably passed for a smile. The photographer clicked away, satisfied. After, Riven walked her back to her quarters. The corridors felt different now. She wasn't a guest anymore. Wasn't a visitor with temporary status. She was the Alpha King's wife. That title carried weight she was still learning to measure. You handled that well, Riven said as they climbed the stairs. It was 5 minutes of saying I do and signing papers. Not exactly challenging. The ceremony wasn't the test. Tonight is. He stopped outside her door. The dinner will be vicious. Every house representative will be looking for ammunition, weakness, ignorance, anything they can use to undermine either our position or our marriage. Seraphine Sinclair will be there, along with her parents. So will representatives from Moorgrave and Torin. Expect coordinated attacks. Comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to prepare you. Riven's expression was serious. You've trained hard this week. Trust that training, and if something happens that you can't handle, look at me. I'll intervene. Won't that make me look weak? It'll make you look smart. Knowing when to ask for backup is strength, not weakness. He paused. Also, one other thing, we haven't discussed sleeping arrangements. Lyra's heart skipped. The contract said separate quarters, and we'll maintain separate quarters, but appearances matter. For the next 6 months, you'll officially reside in the Alpha King's wing. Separate bedroom, yes, but connected rooms. The staff and guards need to see you coming and going from my quarters, not from a guest room 3 floors down. Understood? Understood. Your things are being moved now. I'll have someone show you the new space after dinner. Riven glanced at his watch. Rest, eat something, be ready at 1800 hours. Formal attire, full protocol. Don't be late. He left without waiting for a response. Lyra entered her quarters, soon to be former quarters, and sank onto the bed. Married. Actually, legally married to Riven Kalor. The reality of it was starting to hit in waves. 6 months of this. 6 months of formal dinners and political warfare and living in connected rooms with a man she barely knew. What had she done? No, she knew what she'd done. Made a choice. A strategic, desperate, possibly insane choice, but a choice nonetheless. And now she had to live with the consequences. She forced herself to eat the lunch that had been delivered, then tried to rest. Sleep didn't come. Her mind was too active, running through every possible scenario for tonight's dinner. But she lay still, conserving energy, until Kestrel knocked at 1700 hours. Time to get ready. The formal attire turned out to be a dress in deep emerald that made her dark hair look almost black. More severe than the wedding dress, with a high neckline and long sleeves, but elegant in its simplicity. The seamstresses had outdone themselves. Kestrel helped with her hair, pulled back in a style that was both formal and practical, nothing that could be grabbed or pulled in a physical altercation. You look like you belong here, Kestrel said, studying her reflection. That's good. First impressions matter. At 1800 hours exactly, Lyra met Riven outside the formal dining hall. He'd changed into black formal wear with silver accents, looking every inch the ruler he was. His eyes swept over her once, assessing. Good. You look formidable. That's the goal, right? Always. He offered his arm. Ready? No, but let's do it anyway. The formal dining hall was larger than the ceremony space, with a long table that could seat 30. Tonight, only 14 chairs were occupied, Riven and Lyra at the head, with representatives from all 7 houses arranged down both sides. Seraphine Sinclair sat directly across from Lyra, her ice-blue eyes already calculating. Her parents flanked her. Lord Darius Sinclair, a man with silver hair and a merchant's sharp gaze, and Lady Celeste, beautiful and cold as winter. House Morgrave sent their heir, a brutal-looking man named Castor with scars across his knuckles. House Torrens sent their matriarch, Elder Miriam, ancient and sharp as broken glass. The other houses sent various representatives, all watching with predatory interest. Riven pulled out Lyra's chair. She sat, aware of every eye on her. Welcome, Riven said, his voice carrying easily across the table. Thank you for joining us on such short notice. I wanted to introduce my wife properly before the formal announcement spread through normal channels. How thoughtful, Lord Darius said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. Though I must admit, Alpha King, the engagement came as quite a surprise. We had no idea you were even courting anyone. I prefer to keep my personal life private until decisions are made. Indeed, and what a decision. Lady Celeste's smile was knife-sharp. Lyra Vance, from House Vance, if I'm not mistaken, a minor house with little political influence and, forgive me for being direct, a rather troubled recent history. Here it came. The first attack. Lyra kept her expression neutral. My past is exactly that. Past. I'm focused on my future now. How inspiring, Seraphine said, her voice dripping false sweetness. Though one does wonder what exactly attracted the Alpha King to you. No political connections, no military background, no particular skills that I'm aware of. What made you stand out? Riven's hand moved to rest on the table, a subtle warning, But Lyra remembered his advice. Don't defend yourself. I suppose you'd have to ask him, she said calmly, reaching for her water glass. Though I'm flattered by your intense interest in my marriage. Seraphine's smile froze. Servants began bringing food. Courses of roasted meat, vegetables, bread. The conversation continued with poisonous politeness. Lord Darius asked pointed questions about Lyra's education. Elder Miriam wondered aloud about her understanding of territorial politics. Castor Moregrave simply stared at her like she was a puzzle he was deciding whether to solve or destroy. Halfway through the second course, Lady Celeste leaned forward. Tell me, dear, do you understand what you've walked into? The Northern Territory isn't like the soft Southern courts. Here, weakness is fatal. One misstep, one moment of poor judgment, and the consequences are severe. I'm aware. Are you? Because from where I sit, you look like a woman out of her depth, playing at being a queen when you can barely handle being discarded by a minor house heir. The table went quiet. Lyra set down her fork with deliberate care. Her training with Thessa kicked in. Don't get defensive, don't show emotion, don't give them the satisfaction. Lady Celeste, I appreciate your concern for my well-being, but I assure you, I understand exactly what I've walked into. And unlike some, I didn't need political maneuvering or family pressure to get here. I simply asked. The silence deepened. Then Riven laughed. Short, sharp, genuine. Well said. Lady Celeste's face went red. Alpha King, surely you don't approve of such disrespect. I approve of honesty, which my wife just demonstrated admirably. His voice hardened. And I'll remind everyone at this table that attacking her is attacking me. Choose your next words carefully. The tension was thick enough to cut. Lord Darius recovered first, forcing a diplomatic smile. Of course, no offense intended. We're simply curious about this unexpected development. You must understand, Alpha King, your marriage affects all our houses. We have legitimate concerns about how this impacts territorial politics. Your concerns are noted and irrelevant. Riven's gray eyes swept the table. My marriage is my business. What matters to you is that I've removed myself from the marriage market, which means your houses can stop the transparent campaigning and focus on actual governance. You're welcome. Castor Moregrave spoke for the first time, his voice like grinding stone. Removing yourself from the market creates instability. 3 houses were counting on alliance through marriage. Now we have to recalculate our positions going into the gathering. That's not nothing. Then recalculate. You have 3 weeks. Riven reached for his wine. But do it quietly. I'm not interested in house politics interfering with territorial security. Easy to say when you're the one who disrupted the balance, Elder Miriam observed. We've been negotiating potential alliances for months. Your marriage threw all that into chaos. Good. Chaos reveals true intentions. I'm curious to see who allies with whom now that marriage leverage is off the table. The dinner continued, each course bringing new verbal sparring. Lyra fielded questions about her plans, her role, her understanding of protocol. She deflected, redirected, and occasionally struck back when provoked, always staying just this side of outright confrontation. By the time dessert arrived, she was exhausted from the constant mental warfare. Then Seraphine made her move. I have a question for Lyra, she said, her voice carrying across the table. A simple one, really. Do you love him? The table went still again. Lyra met Seraphine's ice-blue eyes. This was a trap. Any answer would be dissected, weaponized. Saying yes would be obvious performance. Saying no would suggest the marriage was purely transactional, which would undermine its legitimacy. That's a personal question, Lyra said carefully. Is it? You're a public figure now. The Alpha King's wife. Your relationship affects all of us. Seraphine leaned forward, predatory. So I'll ask again. Do you love him? Or is this exactly what it looks like? A desperate social climber latching onto power? Riven's expression went cold. Seraphine. No. Lyra put her hand on his arm, stopping him. She kept her eyes on Seraphine. You want an answer? Fine. What I feel for my husband is between us. But I'll tell you what I don't feel. I don't feel the need to justify my marriage to someone who's bitter that she wasn't chosen. I don't feel obligated to perform emotion for your entertainment, and I don't feel remotely threatened by your transparent attempt to undermine me. She stood, her chair scraping back. If you'll excuse me, I'm done with this conversation. Lyra walked out of the dining hall, her heart pounding, aware that she'd just committed a massive breach of protocol. You didn't walk out on formal dinners. You didn't publicly insult House representatives. You especially didn't do it on your wedding day. But she was done being their verbal punching bag. She made it to the corridor before Riven caught up to her. "That was either brilliant or suicidal," he said. "I haven't decided which." "Probably both." Lyra's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I just insulted House Sinclair's daughter in front of 6 other houses. That's bad, right?" "Depends on your definition of bad." Riven studied her. "You drew a line. Showed you won't be bullied. That's either going to earn respect or make you an even bigger target." "Great. But—" His mouth curved slightly. "Watching you shut down Seraphine was worth whatever political fallout comes next. She's been insufferable for years. Someone needed to put her in her place." Behind them, voices rose from the dining hall, angry, overlapping, arguing. Lord Darius's voice cut through. "This is unacceptable. The girl has no training, no discipline. The girl is my wife." Riven's voice carried back, cold as winter. "And she just demonstrated more spine than anyone else at this table. If you have complaints, direct them to me, not her." More arguing, then footsteps, multiple people leaving, voices fading toward the exit. Kestrel appeared from a side corridor. "Well, that was dramatic. Half the houses just left in protest. The other half are demanding private meetings with the Alpha King. And someone leaked to the press already. Your walkout is going to be headline news by morning." "Perfect," Lyra muttered. "Actually, it might be," Kestrel said thoughtfully. "You look strong, uncompromising. The Alpha King's equal, not his accessory. That's powerful imagery. Or it makes me look unstable and disrespectful. 6 of one, half dozen of the other." Kestrel glanced at Riven. "You need to do damage control with the houses. I'll take Lyra to your quarters. Get her settled." Riven nodded, then turned to Lyra. "We'll talk later. And for what it's worth, you did well tonight. Better than I expected." He left before she could respond. Kestrel led her through corridors to a section of the keep she hadn't seen before, the Alpha King's private wing. The quarters were massive, a central sitting room with a fireplace, 2 separate bedrooms on opposite sides, a shared office space, and a private bathroom that was larger than her entire previous suite. "Your bedroom is there," Kestrel pointed. "His is there." Sitting room and office are shared. Staff will knock before entering. Guards are stationed at the entrance to the wing, not inside. Privacy is respected within these walls. Lyra walked to her new bedroom. Her belongings had been moved, everything unpacked and organized with military precision. The bed was massive, the furniture expensive and practical. A window overlooked the training grounds. "Get some rest," Kestrel advised. "Tomorrow starts the real work. You're officially the Alpha King's wife now. Every move you make will be scrutinized, every word analyzed. Welcome to the rest of your life for the next 6 months." After Kestrel left, Lyra stood in the middle of her new bedroom, trying to process everything. She'd made it through the ceremony, survived the dinner, stood up to Seraphine Sinclair, and walked out with her head high. But the cost was still being calculated. She changed into sleeping clothes, washed her face, and was climbing into bed when she heard movement in the sitting room. Riven, returning from whatever damage control he'd been doing. Lyra hesitated, then grabbed a robe and went out to the shared space. Riven was pouring himself a drink at the bar, still in his formal attire though he'd loosened the collar. He looked tired, the first time she'd seen anything resembling fatigue on his face. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. "Too wired. You?" "I don't sleep much anyway." He poured a second glass, offered it to her. "The houses are in chaos. Sinclair's demanding a formal apology. Moorgrave wants assurances about the gathering. Torin is threatening to pull their agricultural support if you're not properly disciplined." Lyra's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize. You did exactly what you needed to do." Riven finally turned to face her. "They were testing you, seeing if you'd break. Instead, you showed teeth. That's good. Means they can't treat you like a decorative prop." It also made enemies. You already had enemies the moment I put a ring on your finger. At least now they know you're not defenseless. He took a long drink. "Tomorrow will be worse. The press will tear apart every moment of that dinner. Social media will explode. And in 9 days you have to walk into Dorian Hale's wedding and face everyone who watched you get publicly humiliated." "I know," Do you? Riven set down his glass. Because this is the point where most people would realize the cost is too high, that no amount of social rehabilitation is worth this level of constant warfare. Lyra met his eyes. Is that what you think? That I'll quit? I think you're stronger than I initially calculated. But strength has limits. Everyone breaks eventually. Then I guess we'll see where my limits are. Something shifted in Riven's expression, reassessment maybe, or the beginning of actual respect. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we deal with the fallout. Lyra returned to her bedroom, but sleep was impossible. Her mind kept replaying the dinner, Seraphine's questions, her own responses. Had she made the right calls? Or had she just destroyed whatever chance she had at surviving this arrangement? She was still awake when dawn started breaking over the mountains. The next 4 days were a blur of media management and political fallout. The press coverage was exactly as vicious as predicted. Alpha King's wife insults House Sinclair at welcome dinner. Lyra Kaylor too weak for northern politics? Sinclair family demands apology after public humiliation. But there was also unexpected support. Some outlets praised her for standing up to bullying. Others focused on the power dynamic, painting her as the underdog fighting against entitled nobility. Public opinion split 50-50. Half thought she was brave, half thought she was reckless and disrespectful. Lyra stopped reading the coverage after day 2. It didn't matter what strangers thought. What mattered was surviving until Dorian's wedding. Tessa continued training sessions, now focused on public appearances and crisis response. Someone grabs you at an event. What do? Break the hold, create distance, signal security. Good. Someone corners you verbally, asks invasive questions. What do? Deflect, redirect, walk away if necessary. Better. Someone tries to physically harm you in a crowded space. What do? Defend myself, create noise, make it impossible for them to claim it was an accident. They ran scenarios until Lyra could respond without thinking, until her body knew what to do even when her mind was panicking. Riven was increasingly absent, meetings with the houses, damage control, preparation for the gathering. When they did cross paths in their shared quarters, the conversations were brief and professional. Partners in a strategic arrangement, nothing more. But on the 8th day, everything changed. Lyra was in the training yard with Tessa, running defensive drills, when Kestrel appeared with urgent news. Dorian Hale just released a statement to the press. Lyra's stomach dropped. What kind of statement? The kind designed to maximize damage. Kestrel pulled out her tablet, showed her the headline. Dorian Hale speaks. I tried to save her from herself. Lyra scanned the article, her vision blurring with rage. Dorian had given an exclusive interview painting himself as the victim, claiming he'd ended their engagement because Lyra was unstable, obsessive, and showed concerning behavior that raised red flags. He implied mental health issues, suggested she'd manipulated the Alpha King, positioned himself as the concerned ex-fiancé who tried to help her but was forced to cut ties for his own safety. It was character assassination wrapped in false concern. This is... Lyra couldn't even finish the sentence. Strategic, Tessa said grimly. He knows you're attending his wedding tomorrow. This is preemptive damage control. He's reframing the narrative before you even show up. Kestrel was already typing on her tablet. We need a response. Fast. This story is spreading like wildfire. Every outlet is picking it up. No response, Riven's voice came from behind them. They all turned. He approached from the keep entrance, his expression dark. Alpha King, Kestrel started. I said no response. Defending against lies gives them legitimacy. We ignore this completely. But the damage? Lyra's voice shook. He's calling me mentally unstable, obsessive. This will destroy whatever credibility I've built. Only if you let it. Riven's gray eyes were hard. Tomorrow you walk into that wedding as my wife. That's your response. Not words, not statements, presence, power. Let him talk. Let the press speculate. Then show up and prove every word he said was desperate fiction. And if people believe him, then they're not worth convincing. Riven turned to Kestrel. Monitor the coverage, but issue no statements. Complete silence from our side. Let Dorian Hale's words stand alone without our validation. After he left, Lyra stood in the training yard, her hands clenched into fists. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would walk into the Moonstone Ballroom, where she'd been publicly humiliated, and face everyone who'd witnessed her lowest moment. And she'd do it beside the Alpha King. Let Dorian try to paint her as unstable, then. The day of Dorian's wedding arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, mild temperature, the kind of day that made everything look deceptively peaceful. Lyra stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection in the dress the seamstresses had created for this moment. Deep red, elegant and severe, with a neckline that suggested strength rather than seduction. Her hair pulled back in the same severe style from the formal dinner. Minimal jewelry except for the ring Riven had given her at the ceremony. Simple silver band, no ostentation. She looked like the Alpha King's wife. Now she just had to act like it. Riven appeared in the doorway between their rooms. He wore black with red accents that matched her dress, coordinated without being obvious, strategic presentation. Ready? No, but that's never stopped me before. His mouth curved slightly. Good answer. The drive to the Moonstone estate took 40 minutes. Lyra spent it staring out the window, her stomach in knots. The last time she'd been here, she'd been Dorian's fiancée, preparing for what she'd thought would be her own wedding. Instead, she'd been publicly discarded. Now she was returning as someone else entirely. The estate grounds were packed. Carriages lined the circular drive. Guests arriving in formal attire, security everywhere. The Hale family had spared no expense. This was meant to be the social event of the season. Their vehicle pulled up to the entrance. Riven exited first, then offered his hand. Lyra took it, stepped out, and immediately felt every eye within 50 feet turned toward them. The crowd went silent. Then the whispers started, a wave of shocked speculation rolling through the gathered guests. That's the Alpha King. With Lyra Vance. Is that really her? Oh, this is going to be interesting. Riven kept his hand on the small of her back as they walked toward the entrance. Lyra held her head high, maintaining the expression Kestrel had drilled into her, pleasant but unreadable, acknowledging no one specifically. They passed through security, extra thorough given Riven's presence, and entered the ballroom. It was exactly as Lyra remembered. Crystal chandeliers, white flowers everywhere, orchestra playing soft music. 300 guests in formal attire, all turning to stare as the Alpha King and his wife entered. And at the front of the room, standing with his bride-to-be, Dorian Hale went white as death. Lyra felt a surge of vicious satisfaction. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this. They found their assigned seats, front section, ironically close to the family rows. Riven pulled out her chair, sat beside her, his presence alone commanding attention from everyone nearby. Breathe, he murmured, low enough only she could hear. You're doing fine. The ceremony began. Lyra watched Dorian marry his new bride, a woman named Camille from a wealthy merchant family, pretty and appropriate in everything Lyra apparently hadn't been. The vows were traditional, the whole thing perfectly choreographed. And through it all, Lyra sat beside the Alpha King, her expression neutral, her spine straight. After the ceremony, the reception. This was the dangerous part. Mingling, conversation, direct confrontation possibilities. Riven stayed close, his hand occasionally touching her elbow or back, a constant reminder of his presence. People approached in waves, some offering congratulations on her marriage, others making pointed comments about the timing, a few brave souls asking directly about Dorian's interview. Lyra deflected everything with the responses she'd practiced. Pleasant, brief, revealing nothing. Then Dorian's mother appeared, Lady Helena Hale, dressed in pale blue, her expression a mix of pity and disdain. Lyra, how unexpected to see you here. Lady Helena, congratulations on the wedding. Yes, well, Dorian has found happiness with someone more suited to his needs. Her eyes flicked to Riven, then back. Though I must say, your own marriage came as quite a shock. So sudden. So unconventional? Lyra supplied. I was going to say concerning, given Dorian's recent statements about your behavior. Riven's hand moved to Lyra's back. A warning, a support, a reminder. Dorian is entitled to his opinions, Lyra said calmly. However inaccurate they may be. Inaccurate? Lady Helena's eyebrows rose. He was quite specific about concerning patterns. My wife's mental health is not a topic for discussion, Riven interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that ended conversations. Especially not based on the word of someone with obvious bias and motivation to discredit her. If you have concerns, Lady Helena, I suggest you direct them to me. I'll be happy to clarify exactly how wrong your son is. Lady Helena's face went red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked away without another word. Lyra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Thank you. Don't thank me. I meant every word. Riven's gray eyes swept the room. This place is hostile territory. Stay close. They moved through the reception, a unit. Riven deflected the worst questions, Lyra handled the social pleasantries, and together they projected an image of unified strength that made people hesitate to attack directly. Then Dorian himself appeared, Camille on his arm, his smile forced and brittle. Alpha King, what an honor to have you at our wedding. Congratulations on your marriage, Riven said with perfect neutrality. Dorian's eyes moved to Lyra. Up close she could see the calculation, the uncertainty. He'd expected her to show up broken, or not at all. Instead, she was standing beside the most powerful man in 6 provinces, looking nothing like the desperate failure he'd tried to paint her as. Lyra, you look well. Thank you. So do you. Camille, congratulations. The bride, nervous, clearly uncomfortable, murmured thanks. Dorian's smile tightened. I have to admit I was surprised to hear about your engagement. Very sudden. Sometimes you just know, Lyra said simply. Do you? Because I remember you taking 2 years to commit to our engagement, and yet you married the Alpha King after what, a week of knowing him? Dorian's tone suggested deep skepticism. Forgive me for being concerned. You weren't in a good place emotionally when we parted ways. There it was. The public callback to his interview, the suggestion that she was unstable, impulsive, making reckless decisions. Riven's expression went cold. Careful, Hale. I'm simply concerned for an old friend. You lost the right to concern yourself with my wife the moment you publicly humiliated her. Riven's voice was quiet, but carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. And your recent interview about her mental state? That was character assassination, not concern. So let me be clear. If you continue to spread lies about Lyra, I will take it as a personal attack. And attacks against me don't end well. The threat hung in the air, crystal clear. Dorian paled. Around them, nearby conversations had stopped, everyone listening with barely concealed fascination. I didn't mean to offend. Yes, you did, and you failed. Riven took Lyra's hand. Enjoy your wedding, Hale. And consider this your only warning. Next time you mention my wife in public, I'll remind you exactly why people fear the Alpha King. They walked away, leaving Dorian standing there looking like he'd been physically struck. Lyra's heart was pounding. That was necessary. He needed to understand the consequences of attacking you. Riven's grip on her hand was firm, grounding. Are you all right? Actually, yes. For the first time since this whole mess started, I feel... She paused, searching for the word. Powerful. Good. Hold on to that feeling. They stayed another hour, long enough to make their point, not long enough to suggest they were intimidated or uncomfortable. Then they made their exit with the same coordinated grace they'd entered with. As their vehicle pulled away from the Moonstone estate, Lyra looked back at the building where her old life had ended, where she'd been discarded and humiliated. She'd returned as someone completely different. And for the first time since agreeing to this insane marriage, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could actually survive the next 6 months. Riven was quiet on the drive back, staring out his own window. Finally, he said, You handled that better than I expected. The confrontation with Dorian, most people would have either fallen apart or lashed out. You stayed controlled. I learned from the best torturers. Thessa and Kestrel are very thorough. His mouth curved. They are, but training only goes so far. The rest was you. Your choice to stand up, to show strength instead of weakness. That matters. Lyra looked at him, this dangerous stranger she'd married for strategic reasons. Why do you care? Whether I'm strong or weak, I mean. The contract doesn't require you to actually support me emotionally. You could have let me crash and burn. Riven was quiet for a long moment. Because I chose you, and I don't choose poorly. If you'd broken tonight, it would have reflected badly on my judgment. But you didn't break, which means I was right about you, and I'm rarely wrong about people. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd gotten from him. Thank you for defending me in there, for threatening Dorian. You didn't have to eat. Yes, I did. You're my wife, temporary or not, that means something. His gray eyes met hers. For the next 6 months, your enemies are my enemies. Your battles are my battles. That's the bargain. They arrived back at the Blood Keep as the sun set behind the mountains. The fortress looked different now, less like a prison, more like home wasn't the right word, but maybe something close to it. Inside their shared quarters, Riven poured them both drinks. To surviving the first major test, Lyra clinked her glass against his. How many more tests are there? The gathering starts in 2 weeks. That'll be the real trial. Everything up to now has been warm-up. He took a long drink. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start preparing for political warfare on a scale that makes tonight look like a garden party. After he retreated to his room, Lyra stood at the window overlooking the training grounds. She'd done it. Walked into the wedding where she was supposed to be the pitied failure and came out looking like the victor. Dorian's interview had backfired spectacularly, and whatever happened next, she'd proven to herself that she wasn't the weak, broken woman everyone had assumed. She was Lyra Kaelor now, the Alpha King's wife, and she was just getting started. The morning after Dorian's wedding, Lyra woke to find her face on every major news outlet in the Northern Territory. Not in a bad way. The headlines had shifted overnight. Alpha Queen confronts lying ex-fiancé. Dorian Hale's interview backfires spectacularly. Lyra Kaelor, from humiliation to power in 3 weeks. Photos from the wedding showed her beside Riven, poised and elegant, while Dorian looked uncomfortable and defensive. The narrative had flipped. She was reading through the coverage on her tablet when Riven knocked on her bedroom door. You're awake. Good. We need to talk. Lyra pulled on a robe and opened the door. Riven stood there with his own tablet, looking almost amused. You've seen the coverage? Hard to miss. Is this going to be a problem? The opposite. This is leverage. He walked into her room, first time he'd crossed that threshold, and set his tablet on her desk. Look at the social media response. Public opinion has swung 70% in your favor. People are calling you brave for facing Dorian, calling him a liar and a coward. The houses that were hostile last week are suddenly reassessing. Lyra scanned the numbers. He was right. The comment sections that had been vicious before were now full of support. Why the sudden shift? Because you won. Publicly, decisively, in a way everyone could see. Riven leaned against her desk. Before yesterday, you were just the Alpha King's mysterious wife. An unknown factor, but walking into that wedding took guts. Facing down Dorian and his family took composure. And the fact that you did it without falling apart proved his interview was fiction. People respect strength. You showed them strength. So what does this mean for the gathering? It means you're no longer a liability. You're an asset. His gray eyes were calculating. The houses were planning to attack you as my weak point. Now they have to recalculate. Because attacking someone with public support is politically dangerous. Kestrel appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. House Sinclair just requested a private meeting with both of you today. Riven's expression went sharp. Did they specify the purpose? Just said it was urgent and diplomatic in nature. They're sending Lord Darius and Seraphine. No Lady Celeste, which is interesting. She's usually the one who handles negotiations. They're coming to make peace, Riven said with certainty, or at least test the waters for it. The question is why now? Because they're losing the public relations battle, Lyra said quietly. Both of them looked at her. She stood, tightening her robe. Seraphine attacked me at the dinner. Lady Celeste was vicious. The Sinclair house looks like bullies going after someone weaker. After yesterday, that narrative got even worse. They need to rehabilitate their image, which means making nice with me. Riven studied her with something like approval. Exactly right. Aldrich has been fielding calls all morning. House Sinclair's approval ratings dropped 8 points in the last 24 hours. They're hemorrhaging goodwill, and it's affecting their business contracts. They need to fix this. So we have leverage, Lyra said. We do. The question is how we use it. Riven turned to Kestrel. Schedule the meeting for this afternoon. Private setting, minimal staff. And make sure Thessa is nearby. I don't trust Seraphine not to try something desperate. After Kestrel left, Riven lingered. You're learning fast. The political calculus, most people take years to understand how public opinion affects house negotiations. You picked it up in seconds. Survival instinct. I'm good at identifying threats and opportunities. Good. Because the Sinclair meeting is both. He headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. We've been invited to a pre-gathering reception. House Blackwater is hosting. It's in 4 days. Mandatory attendance for anyone who matters. That means you need formal training in combat etiquette. Combat etiquette? House Blackwater are warriors. Their events involve sparring demonstrations, weapons displays, and ritualized dueling. You need to know the protocols, or you'll accidentally insult someone and start a blood feud. Fantastic. Another way to die. His mouth curved. Welcome to Northern politics. The morning was spent with Aldrich, learning the elaborate rules of warrior culture. How to observe a duel without showing disrespect. The proper way to decline a challenge. Which weapons were considered honorable versus cowardly. The significance of different fighting stances. House Blackwater takes this very seriously, Aldrich warned. Their leader, Commander Arcturus, has killed 3 people in formal duels over perceived insults. Don't touch anyone's weapons without permission. Don't comment on technique unless asked. And never ever suggest that negotiation is preferable to combat. They consider it weakness. These people sound delightful. They're useful allies and dangerous enemies. The Alpha King maintains careful balance with them. Aldrich closed his book. Your role at the reception is to observe, show appropriate respect, and not get challenged to a duel you can't win. Can I be challenged? Technically, yes, though it would be considered extremely provocative to challenge the Alpha King's wife directly. More likely, someone will make subtle insults designed to provoke you into issuing a challenge. Don't take the bait. The afternoon brought the Sinclair meeting. Lord Darius and Seraphine arrived exactly on time, escorted to a private conference room in the keep's administrative wing. Lyra and Riven were already seated when they entered. Thessa stood near the door, her presence a clear message about security. Lord Darius looked older than he had at the dinner, the stress showing in the lines around his eyes. Seraphine's ice blue gaze was harder to read, but her body language was defensive rather than aggressive. Alpha King, Mrs. Kaylor. Lord Darius inclined his head. Thank you for seeing us on short notice. You said it was urgent, Riven replied, his tone neutral. What can we do for House Sinclair? We'd like to discuss the recent tension between our families, specifically the incident at the welcome dinner and the subsequent media coverage. Lord Darius folded his hands on the table. It's become clear that our initial approach to your marriage was inappropriate. We allowed personal disappointment to color our professional judgment. Is this an apology? Lyra asked directly. Seraphine's jaw tightened. Lord Darius cleared his throat. It's an acknowledgement of mistakes made. My daughter and wife were discourteous at the dinner. That discourtesy reflected poorly on our house and damaged our relationship with the Alpha King. We'd like to make amends. Why? Riven's question was sharp. Specifically, why now? You had 2 weeks to extend this olive branch. You waited until public opinion turned against you. So I'll ask again, why now, and what do you actually want? The bluntness caught Lord Darius off guard. He exchanged a glance with Seraphine before answering. We want to rebuild our working relationship. House Sinclair controls significant trade routes that benefit the entire territory. A poor relationship with the Alpha King's household affects our ability to negotiate contracts. And yes, the public perception has been damaging. We'd like to change that narrative. By making peace with me, Lyra said. By acknowledging that we misjudged you. Lord Darius actually sounded sincere. You're not the social climber we assumed. You've shown strength and composure under extreme pressure. That deserves respect. Seraphine looked like she was chewing glass, but she nodded. I was wrong at the dinner. My comments were out of line. That's not an apology, Lyra pointed out. No, it's not. Seraphine met her eyes directly. I don't like you. I think you got lucky. But I respect that you didn't break when we pushed. Most people would have. It was possibly the most honest thing Seraphine had ever said to her. Riven leaned back in his chair. Here's what's going to happen. House Sinclair issues a public statement expressing support for my marriage and acknowledging that initial skepticism was premature. You extend a formal invitation to Lyra for the Sinclair family's annual charity gala. She'll attend, you'll treat her with appropriate respect, and the photos will show unity. In return, I'll continue our existing trade agreements and consider your house for expanded shipping contracts after the gathering.
That's generous, Lord Darius said carefully. It's strategic. Your trade routes are valuable, but this only works if the peace is genuine. One more public attack from anyone in your family, and the deal is off, permanently. Lord Darius nodded slowly. Understood. We accept your terms. Seraphine looked less thrilled, but didn't contradict her father. After they left, Thessa whistled low. That was a power play. You just turned an enemy house into a reluctant ally. For now, Riven corrected, Sinclair will keep the peace as long as it benefits them. The moment the calculus changes, so will their loyalty. But it buys us breathing room before the gathering. Lyra was still processing the meeting. Seraphine hates me. That wasn't an act. No, it wasn't. But she also respected you enough to admit she was wrong. That's rare. Riven stood. Take the win. 3 weeks ago, you had no allies and no position. Now you've neutralized one of the 3 houses that were actively hostile. That's progress. That evening, Lyra found herself in the training yard with Thessa, running through combat protocols for the Blackwater reception. The key is posture, Thessa explained, demonstrating a warrior's stance. Warriors read body language. Stand too relaxed, they think you're weak. Too tense, they think you're afraid. You need controlled readiness. Like this. Lyra mimicked the stance. Thessa circled her, making small corrections. Better. Now, if someone shows you a weapon, the respectful response is to acknowledge its quality. You don't touch unless offered. If offered, you examine it briefly and return it with both hands, like this. They practiced the ritual until Lyra could perform it without thinking. Then Thessa had her observe mock duels between warriors, explaining the significance of different moves and the proper responses from observers. If someone wins decisively, you nod once. No applause, no cheering. Warriors don't perform for entertainment, they fight for honor. Treating it like sport is insulting. By the time Thessa dismissed her, Lyra's head was swimming with protocols and her legs ached from holding warrior stances. But she understood the culture better. House Blackwater valued strength, honor, and directness. No political games, no subtle manipulation, just honest combat and clear hierarchy. She could work with that. Back in her quarters, she found Riven working at the shared office desk, surrounded by reports and maps. He glanced up when she entered. How was warrior training? Exhausting but useful. I think I understand House Blackwater now. Good, because Commander Arcturus will test you the moment we arrive. He respects strength and hates pretense. Be direct with him, show no fear, and you'll earn his respect. Show weakness, and he'll dismiss you as decorative. Lyra poured herself a water from the bar. Do you ever get tired of it? The constant performance, the strategic calculations, everyone testing you all the time? Riven was quiet for a moment. Yes, but being Alpha King isn't about comfort. It's about maintaining order in a territory full of powerful families who would tear each other apart without a strong central authority. The performance is necessary. Doesn't make it less exhausting. No, it doesn't. He set down his pen. You're adapting faster than anyone I've trained. Most people take months to learn what you've picked up in 3 weeks. That's not just intelligence, it's instinct. You were built for this kind of environment, even if you didn't know it. The compliment caught her off guard. I wasn't built for anything except being a respectable wife to a respectable house. That was the plan until Dorian imploded it. Then his loss is my gain. Riven's gray eyes were serious. I meant what I said at the Sinclair meeting. You've shown real strength. That matters to me. Something warm unfurled in Lyra's chest. Dangerous. This was still a contract marriage with an expiration date. Getting emotionally invested in Riven's approval was a fast track to getting hurt. I should get some rest. 4 days until the Blackwater reception. She retreated to her bedroom before the conversation could get more complicated. The next 3 days passed in intensive preparation. Aldrich drilled her on Blackwater family history. Thessa ran combat protocol scenarios. Kestrel prepared her for media coverage, since every major outlet would be covering the reception. The seamstresses created another dress, this one in deep charcoal gray, with subtle armor-inspired details on the shoulders and neckline. Practical enough to move in, elegant enough for formal setting. Warrior aesthetic without pretending to be something she wasn't. The morning of the reception, Lyra woke with her stomach in knots. This would be different from the Sinclair dinner. House Blackwater didn't do subtle political warfare. They were direct, confrontational, brutal in their honesty. One wrong move, one sign of weakness, and she'd lose their respect permanently. Riven met her in the sitting room, dressed in formal black with silver accents that echoed Blackwater House colors. He assessed her appearance with professional eyes. Good. You look like you belong. Remember, direct eye contact, confident posture, no hesitation in your voice. Arcturus values decisiveness above all else. What if he asks me something I don't know? Say, I don't know, but I'll find out. Never lie to a warrior. They can smell dishonesty from across a room. The Blackwater estate was in the northern mountains, a fortress built into the rock itself. Everything about it screamed military precision. Guards in formation, weapons displayed openly, training yards visible from the entrance. This wasn't a social venue. It was a garrison that occasionally hosted events. Commander Arcturus Blackwater met them at the entrance. A massive man in his 50s, scarred and dangerous looking, with gray streaking through his black hair. His handshake with Riven was firm, assessing. Then he turned to Lyra. So you're the woman who walked into the Blood Keep and demanded the Alpha King's attention. Bold move. Desperate move, Lyra corrected, but it worked. Arcturus's scarred face split into a grin. Honest, I like that. Most nobles try to pretty up their motivations. You own yours. He gestured toward the main hall. Come. We have demonstrations planned. You ever see formal combat? No, Commander. Then you're in for an education. And call me Arcturus. Anyone married to Riven doesn't need to stand on ceremony with me. The reception hall was massive, with a raised platform in the center for dueling. Around it, tables were set up for dining and observation. Perhaps 200 guests, all from warrior families, all watching with the sharp attention of people who understood violence intimately. Arcturus led them to the head table. As they sat, he leaned toward Lyra. Fair warning, some of my younger warriors might challenge each other to impress you. It's traditional when the Alpha King brings a new wife. Don't look away during the fights. That's seen as disrespect. Understood. The demonstrations began. 2 warriors entered the platform, armed with practice blades, and proceeded to try to kill each other with controlled brutality. The speed and precision were stunning. Lyra watched without flinching, applying everything Thessa had taught her about proper observation protocols. When the first duel ended, one warrior yielding after taking a blow to the ribs, Lyra nodded once in acknowledgement. Arcturus noticed, his expression approving. Between demonstrations, guests approached to pay respects to Riven and meet Lyra. The conversations were refreshingly direct. No subtle insults, no political games, just warriors assessing whether she was worth their respect. One woman, Commander Silvara of House Rennick, another warrior family, sat down across from Lyra with a blunt question. How many people have tried to kill you since you married into this mess? None successfully, Lyra replied. Silvara laughed. Good answer. How many tried? Depends on whether you count political assassination or just physical threats. I like her, Silvara announced to Riven. She's got spine. Most soft nobles would have fainted by now. She's not most nobles, Riven said. The evening progressed. Lyra navigated conversations with warrior families, watched brutal dueling demonstrations without showing discomfort, and slowly earned nods of approval from people who'd been prepared to dismiss her. Then Arcturus stood, calling for attention. We have a special demonstration tonight. My son Marcus has challenged Commander Thorn of House Frost to settle a territorial dispute. Winner takes the contested land. Loser accepts the decision with honor. The crowd's energy shifted. This was real, not performance. Actual stakes. Marcus Blackwater was younger than his father, but just as dangerous looking. Commander Thorn was smaller, faster, with the cold precision of someone who'd won through technique rather than raw power. The fight was vicious. Unlike the earlier demonstrations, this one had genuine malice behind it. They used real blades, not practice weapons. Blood was drawn within the first minute. Lyra forced herself to watch without reacting, her hand steady on the table despite her racing heart.
This was what warrior culture meant. Disputes settled through combat, land, and honor won through violence. The fight ended when Marcus disarmed Thorn and held a blade to his throat. Thorn yielded immediately, accepting defeat with a warrior's grace. The crowd nodded approval. Clean victory, honorable surrender. Arcturus stood again. The land goes to House Blackwater. Commander Thorn, you fought with honor. The dispute is settled. As servants cleaned blood from the platform, Arcturus turned to Lyra. Your first real combat. What did you think? This was a test. She could feel everyone at the head table listening. I think Commander Thorn fought intelligently, but Marcus had better positioning from the start. The outcome was never really in doubt after the first exchange. Arcturus's eyebrows rose. You know combat analysis? I've been training. My instructor is very thorough. Thessa Kane? At Lyra's nod, Arcturus grinned. Best tactical mind in the territory after the Alpha King himself. If she's training you, you're in good hands. He raised his glass. To Lyra Kaelor, who watches warriors bleed without flinching and calls fights like she's been studying combat her whole life. You're welcome at Blackwater Estate anytime. Other glasses raised around the table. Warriors who'd been skeptical earlier now looked at her with something approaching respect. Riven's hand found hers under the table, squeezed once. Approval. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of conversations and demonstrations. By the time they left, Lyra had commitments from 3 different warrior families to support Riven's positions at the gathering. Not because she'd charmed them. Warriors didn't care about charm, but because she'd shown she could handle their world without breaking. In the vehicle heading back to the keep, Riven looked genuinely pleased. That was exceptional. Arcturus doesn't give respect easily. You earned it. I just told the truth and didn't vomit when people started bleeding. That's more than most nobles manage. He was quiet for a moment. You analyzed that fight correctly, by the way. Marcus did have superior positioning from the start. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Thessa drills me on combat reading twice a week. I'm getting better at seeing the patterns. It shows. Riven's gray eyes studied her in the dim light. 3 weeks ago, you walked into my fortress with nothing but desperation and nerve. Now you're earning respect from warrior houses and outmaneuvering political rivals. You're not the same person who made that initial bargain. Is that good or bad? It's remarkable. The word hung between them, charged with something neither of them was ready to name. Back at the keep, they retreated to their separate bedrooms with the excuse of fatigue. But Lyra lay awake for hours, replaying the evening. The fights, the conversations, the moment Arcturus had raised his glass in her honor. She'd done it, earned genuine respect from people who didn't give it freely. The disgraced bride who'd walked into the Blood Keep 3 weeks ago would never have survived tonight. But Lyra Kaelor, the Alpha King's wife, trained by the best warriors in the territory, learning to navigate the most brutal political landscape in 6 provinces, she'd not only survived, she'd thrived. The next morning, Kestrel appeared with news. House Sinclair issued their statement. Full support for your marriage, acknowledgement of their initial errors, invitation to the charity gala. The media is running it as a major reconciliation story. What about the other houses? Morgrave and Torin are watching carefully. Neither has made a move yet, but the fact that Sinclair backed down has them reassessing. Blackwater's public support after last night's reception is also getting attention. You're building a coalition without even trying. Riven joined them in the sitting room, already dressed for the day. The gathering is in 10 days. We need to prepare strategy. Lyra, you'll be attending as my wife, which means you'll be present for all major sessions. The houses will use every opportunity to test your knowledge and composure. What's the goal? Lyra asked. For the gathering, I mean. Maintain balance between the 7 houses. Prevent any dangerous alliances from forming. Secure support for territorial infrastructure projects. And prove that my marriage hasn't made me politically vulnerable. Riven pulled up a holographic display showing the complex web of house relationships. Each house wants something. Our job is to give them just enough to keep them satisfied without giving anyone too much power. Over the next week, they prepared. Aldrich drilled Lyra on every house's current positions, historical grudges, and likely demands. Thessa ran scenarios for potential confrontations. Kestrel managed media coverage, ensuring that the narrative around Lyra stayed positive going into the gathering. And slowly, something shifted between Lyra and Riven. They worked together in the shared office, debating strategy until late at night. They ate meals together, discussing house politics over dinner. They moved through their shared quarters with increasing comfort, the initial awkwardness fading into something almost natural. One evening, 4 days before the gathering, Lyra found Riven on the balcony outside their sitting room, staring at the volcanic mountains. "Can't sleep?" she asked, thinking. The gathering is the real test. Everything until now has been preliminary. He didn't look at her. If we survive it with our positions intact, the rest of the 6 months will be manageable. And if we don't? Then we'll have bigger problems than a temporary marriage. Lyra joined him at the railing. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of volcanic minerals. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I might not answer."
Why did you really agree to marry me? The strategic reasons make sense, but you could have handled the house pressure a dozen other ways. What made you say yes to my proposal?
Riven was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because you reminded me of myself. 7 years ago, when I became Alpha King, I was desperate and dangerous and willing to gamble everything on a single move. Most people thought I'd fail within a year. Instead, I built something stronger than what my father had. When you walked into my war room with that insane proposal, I saw the same desperation, the same willingness to burn everything down and rebuild from ashes. I respected that. And now? Now I think I underestimated you." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting starlight. "You weren't just desperate. You were strategic. You've learned faster than anyone I've trained. You've earned respect from people I've spent years cultivating relationships with. And you've done it all while navigating a world that was designed to break people like you. People like me? Outsiders with no traditional power base. People who have to build their position from nothing." His voice softened slightly. "You're not playing the game I expected. You're changing the game entirely." Lyra's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. This was dangerous territory. They had 6 months, a contract, an expiration date. Getting emotionally involved was a terrible idea. But standing on that balcony with him, talking strategy and survival and the strange partnership they'd built, she felt something shift. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. It hadn't been for a while. "The gathering," she said, forcing herself back to safer ground. "What's the worst-case scenario?" Riven accepted the subject change without comment. "Worst case? The houses form an alliance against me, challenge my authority, potentially my right to lead. It would force a territorial crisis that could lead to civil war. And best case? We maintain balance, prevent any dangerous coalitions, come out with our positions strengthened and the houses too divided to pose a unified threat." He turned to face her fully. "But there's a middle scenario that's more likely. The houses test you specifically, trying to prove you're a weakness they can exploit. If you pass their tests, we win. If you break, everything we've built collapses. No pressure." Welcome to being the Alpha King's wife. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lyra said quietly, "I won't break. Whatever they throw at me at the gathering, I'll handle it." "I know you will." And the certainty in his voice made her believe it too. 3 days before this gathering, everything came together. House Sinclair's public support had prompted House Torrin to reach out with a cautious peace offering. House Blackwater was openly backing Lyra after the reception. Even House Moorgrave, still hostile but calculating, had stopped their public attacks. Lyra Kaylor had gone from unknown liability to recognized power player in less than a month. The night before they left for the gathering, Riven called her into his office. "I have something for you." He handed her a small box. Inside was a silver pin shaped like a wolf, the symbol of the Alpha King's household. "This marks you as part of my inner circle. It's not ceremonial. It grants you authority to speak on my behalf in certain contexts and access to secure areas during the gathering. Don't lose it." Lyra pinned it to her jacket. The weight was minimal, but the significance was enormous. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The gathering starts tomorrow. By the end of the week, you'll either be recognized as a legitimate power in your own right, or you'll be broken and discarded as a failed experiment." His gray eyes were serious. "Everything you've done until now was preparation. Now comes the real battle. Then let's win it." Riven's expression shifted into something that might have been pride. "Together. And for the first time since this whole insane arrangement started, Lyra believed they actually could. The gathering took place in the ancient conclave hall, a neutral territory built centuries ago when the seven houses first agreed to centralize governance. The building sat on an island in the middle of Mirror Lake, accessible only by bridge, designed specifically so no single house could claim home advantage. Lyra stood at the bridge entrance beside Riven, watching the other houses arrive in their formal processions. Each family made a show of it: House Sinclair with their merchant fleet banners, House Moorgrave with armed guards in formation, House Blackwater with warriors carrying ancestral weapons. Power displays. All of it. Reminders that the Alpha King's authority depended on maintaining balance between these competing forces. "Nervous?" Riven asked quietly.
Terrified, but that seems to be my default state lately. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He offered his arm. Ready to walk into the lion's den? With you? Always. They crossed the bridge together, Thessa and two other guards following at a respectful distance. The conclave hall's entrance was grand. Carved stone depicting the founding of the Northern Territory, ancient battles, the first peace agreements, history literally written in rock. Inside, the main chamber was circular, with 7 sections radiating out like spokes on a wheel. Each house had their designated area. At the center, elevated slightly, was the Alpha King's seat, and beside it, a second chair that had been empty for the 7 years of Riven's rule. Until now, Lyra felt every eye in the chamber track their progress as they walked to the central platform. Representatives from all 7 houses watched with varying degrees of hostility, curiosity, and calculation. This was it. The moment where she either proved she belonged or got torn apart in front of everyone who mattered. Riven took his seat. Lyra took hers. The symbolism wasn't subtle. For the first time in 7 years, the Alpha King had a partner. The balance of power had shifted visibly, publicly, undeniably. Lord Arcturus stood first, his voice carrying across the chamber. "We gather as tradition demands. 7 houses, 1 territory, united under the Alpha King's authority. Let the gathering begin." The first day was all procedure. Formal presentations from each house detailing their concerns, needs, and positions on upcoming territorial decisions. Lyra sat beside Riven, maintaining perfect posture, her expression neutral but attentive. She'd been coached extensively on this. Appear engaged, but don't react. Let Riven handle the responses while she observed and learned. But observation alone was revealing. She watched how House Frost's representative deflected questions with half-truths. How House Torrin's matriarch used carefully worded statements to avoid commitment. How Castor Moorgrave sat like a coiled spring, barely containing his aggression. During the lunch recess, Seraphine Sinclair approached their table. She looked uncomfortable, which was almost satisfying. "Mrs. Kaylor, may I speak with you privately?" Riven glanced at Lyra, leaving the decision to her. Lyra nodded. They moved to a quiet alcove overlooking the lake. Seraphine stood stiffly, clearly hating every moment of this. "I'm here because my father ordered me to make nice, but I'm also here because I owe you something resembling honesty." She met Lyra's eyes. "I underestimated you. Badly. I thought you were a desperate social climber who'd crash and burn within weeks. Instead, you've outmaneuvered half the houses and earned respect from people who don't give it freely. That's impressive." "Is this an apology?" "It's an acknowledgement. I still don't like you, but I respect what you've accomplished. And I wanted you to know that House Sinclair will honor our agreement. We won't cause problems at the gathering." It was possibly the most genuine thing Seraphine had ever said to her. Lyra studied the other woman, seeing past the Ice Princess facade to something more complicated underneath. "Thank you for the honesty, and for what it's worth, I don't need you to like me. Just don't underestimate me again." Seraphine's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. "I won't make that mistake twice." The second day brought the real negotiations. Infrastructure proposals, trade agreements, territorial disputes that needed resolution. Lyra watched Riven work with growing admiration. He was brilliant at this, giving each house just enough to feel heard without conceding real power, finding compromise positions that satisfied multiple parties, using leverage when necessary, but preferring negotiation when possible. But the tension was building. She could feel it in the way certain houses kept glancing at her, in the whispered conversations during breaks,
and the calculating looks from representatives who were clearly waiting for something. The explosion came on the third day. Castor Morgrave stood during an infrastructure debate, his voice cutting through the discussion. Before we continue, I have a question for the Alpha King regarding his recent marriage. The chamber went silent.
Riven's expression didn't change. Proceed. You married an unknown woman with no political connections, no significant family backing, and a scandalous recent history. This decision affects all our houses, yet we were given no opportunity for input. I want to know— Castor's eyes fixed on Lyra. What qualifies this woman to sit beside the Alpha King? What value does she bring to the territory beyond satisfying your personal preferences? It was a direct attack, designed to force Riven into defending her, which would make him look weak, or abandoning her, which would destroy her credibility. But before Riven could respond, Lyra stood. I'll answer that myself, Commander Morgrave. The chamber erupted in whispers. Representatives exchanged shocked looks. This wasn't done. The Alpha King's wife didn't speak independently during formal sessions. Riven's hand moved to the armrest of his chair, ready to intervene, but he didn't stop her. Lyra kept her voice steady, projecting across the circular chamber. You asked what qualifies me. Here's your answer. I walked into the Bloodkeep with nothing but desperation and a plan. I negotiated a contract that benefited both parties. I learned your protocols, your cultures, your expectations in 3 weeks. I earned respect from House Blackwater's warriors, made peace with House Sinclair, and navigated political attacks that would have destroyed someone with less nerve. She paused, meeting Castor's aggressive stare without flinching. But more importantly, I'm still here, still standing. Every house in this chamber has tested me through insults, social warfare, public humiliation, and I haven't broken. So, to answer your question, I qualify because I survived. And survival in the Northern Territory is the only qualification that matters. The silence was absolute. Then Arcturus Blackwater laughed, a booming sound that echoed off stone walls. Well said. The girl has spine. I like her answer better than any political justification the Alpha King could have given. Elder Miriam of House Torin nodded slowly. She speaks truth. Survival is indeed the primary qualification for power here, and she has demonstrated unusual resilience. Even Lord Darius Sinclair spoke up. House Sinclair acknowledges Mrs. Kaylor's strength. She has earned our respect through her actions. Castor Morgrave looked furious, but he was outnumbered. He sat down without further comment. Lyra returned to her seat, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Riven's hand found hers under the table, squeezed once. When she glanced at him, his expression was carefully neutral, but his gray eyes showed something like pride.
The session continued, but the dynamic had shifted. Lyra wasn't just the Alpha King's wife anymore. She was a player in her own right. Representatives started directing questions to her about social programs, civilian concerns, matters that traditionally fell outside pure political negotiations but still affected the territory. She answered carefully, using the knowledge Aldrich had drilled into her, deflecting when uncertain, being honest about her limitations. And somehow it worked. Her directness, her willingness to admit when she didn't know something, her obvious intelligence, it all combined to create a presence that people respected. By the fourth day, something unprecedented happened. House Frost's representative approached her directly with a proposal for educational infrastructure improvements, bypassing Riven entirely to negotiate with Lyra about civilian implementation details. Riven watched this with undisguised amusement. You're stealing my job. Just handling the parts you find boring, Lyra shot back. I don't find them boring. I find them time-consuming. If you want to take them over, be my guest. It was a test, she realized, seeing if she could actually handle substantive responsibility, not just ceremonial appearances. She spent the next 2 hours negotiating with House Frost about school funding, teacher training programs, and curriculum development. By the end, they'd hammered out an agreement that satisfied both parties. When she reported back to Riven, he reviewed her work with a critical eye, then nodded. This is solid. Better than what I would have negotiated, actually. You gave them what they needed without overspending. Well done. The praise shouldn't have mattered this much, but it did. The fifth day brought the crisis. House Valen, the dying house that Aldrich had mentioned weeks ago, the one with massive debt and no leverage, made a desperate move. The representative, a gaunt man named Lord Philip, stood during the economic session with a wild proposal. I propose a territorial restructuring. House Valen cedes our lands and titles to the Alpha King's direct control in exchange for debt forgiveness and guaranteed positions for our family members within the central administration. The chamber erupted. This was unprecedented, a house voluntarily dissolving itself. The implications were staggering. Lord Darius was on his feet immediately. Absolutely not. If the Alpha King absorbs Valen's territory directly, it disrupts the entire balance of power. He'd control too much land. Castor Morgrave agreed for once. This sets a dangerous precedent. What stops other struggling houses from doing the same? We'd end up with consolidated power that undermines the entire seven-house structure. But Elder Miriam looked thoughtful. Or it creates a new model. Houses that can't sustain themselves are reorganized rather than left to collapse and create instability. There's logic to it. The debate raged for an hour. Positions hardened. House Sinclair, Morgrave, and Torin opposed. House Blackwater, Rennick, and Frost were cautiously supportive. The chamber was deadlocked, 3 houses against 3, with House Valen's vote obviously in favor of their own proposal. Riven hadn't spoken yet. He sat in his elevated chair, watching the arguments fly back and forth, calculating. Then Lyra leaned close. What if we modified the proposal? Valen doesn't cede directly to you. They cede to a territorial trust administered by representatives from all 7 houses. Shared governance of the reorganized territory. Nobody gains individual power, but the land gets stabilized. Riven's eyes sharpened. That could work. It would require cooperation between houses, which most of them hate, but it solves the power imbalance concern. And it sets a precedent for collaborative problem-solving instead of just power consolidation. That's good for long-term stability. He studied her for a long moment, then stood. I have a counter-proposal. The chamber quieted. Riven laid out Lyra's idea with precision: shared governance, territorial trust, rotating house oversight, clear protocols for decision-making. As he spoke, Lyra watched representatives' expressions shift from hostile to thoughtful. Lord Darius was the first to respond. This is actually workable. It prevents any single entity from gaining too much power while still addressing House Valen's crisis. Arcturus nodded. And it forces houses to cooperate, which is probably good for us. We spend too much time fighting and not enough time governing. Even Castor Morgrave grudgingly agreed. I still don't like it, but it's better than direct consolidation. The vote was unanimous. House Valen's territory would be reorganized under shared governance, setting a new precedent for handling failing houses. After the session, Riven pulled Lyra aside. That was your idea? You just resolved a territorial crisis that I was about to spend weeks negotiating poorly. I just saw a compromise position. You saw a solution that satisfied everyone's concerns while advancing long-term stability. That's not basic compromise. That's strategic brilliance. The intensity in his voice made her pulse quicken. I learned from the best. No, you're better at this than you realize. His gray eyes were serious. The houses respect you now. Not because you're my wife, but because you've proven you understand how this world works and you can navigate it independently. That's rare. That's valuable. Riven, I'm not saying this to flatter you. I'm saying it because it's true, and because, he paused, something complicated crossing his face. Because somewhere in the last month, this stopped being just a strategic arrangement for me. I need you to know that. Lyra's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying the contract expires in 5 months, but I don't want it to. The words came out harder than he probably intended, like he was fighting himself. I'm saying that watching you face down hostile houses and earn respect and grow into power has been the most remarkable thing I've witnessed in years. And I'm saying that I want to renegotiate our agreement. Into what? Something real. Something without an expiration date. His hand found hers. I'm saying I want you to stay, not as a temporary political convenience, as my actual partner, my wife, my equal. The world tilted. Lyra had spent 4 weeks building walls, reminding herself this was temporary, protecting herself from getting too invested, and now Riven was asking her to tear all those walls down. The contract can be amended. We can extend it, make it permanent, whatever you want. He stopped, took a breath. I know this isn't what we agreed to.
I know I'm changing the terms, but I need you to know that what I feel for you isn't strategic anymore. It's real and terrifying and completely outside my normal calculations." Lyra's mind was racing. Everything she'd built here, the respect, the power, the position, had been constructed on the foundation of a temporary arrangement. Making it permanent meant risking everything if it failed, but it also meant keeping everything she'd fought for, the life she'd built, the person she'd become. "Can I think about it?" Something flickered in Riven's eyes. Disappointment maybe, or fear, but he nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Just think about it." The gathering's final day was ceremonial. Formal speeches, official documents signed, commitments made public record. Lyra sat beside Riven through it all, her mind still spinning from his revelation. Did she love him? The question felt too simple for what existed between them. They'd built something complex, respect and trust and partnership forged under pressure. But was that love, or just strategic compatibility? The closing ceremony featured each house leader making a statement about their commitments for the coming year. When Riven stood to give the Alpha King's closing remarks, he surprised everyone. "This gathering has been unusual. We've made unprecedented decisions, established new precedents, and demonstrated that cooperation between houses is possible even when we disagree." He paused. "Much of that progress came from an unexpected source. My wife, Lyra Kalor, contributed ideas and solutions that I would not have conceived alone. She represents a new kind of leadership in the Northern Territory, one built on survival, adaptability, and genuine understanding of our people's needs." He turned to face her directly. "And I'm proud to announce that she will be taking on an official role as Director of Civilian Affairs, overseeing education, healthcare, and social infrastructure across all House territories. This position has been approved by the Territorial Council and will be funded through the shared governance structure we established this week." The chamber erupted in applause, genuine, not just polite. Lyra stood slowly, shock and gratitude and something that might have been love flooding through her. Riven had just given her real power. Institutional authority independent of their marriage. A position that would exist whether they stayed together or not. He was giving her the choice. Stay with him and continue building this partnership, or leave when the contract expired and keep the power and position she'd earned on her own merits. No pressure, no manipulation, just honest respect for everything she'd accomplished. After the ceremony, during the formal reception, representatives from all 7 houses approached to congratulate her. Arcturus clapped her on the shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise. "Civilian Affairs, good choice. You'll be excellent at it." Elder Miriam offered surprisingly warm approval. "You'll have House Taurin's full support for your initiatives. We've needed someone focused on civilian concerns for years." Even Castor Moregrave gave a grudging nod. "Don't mess it up." Later, when the reception finally ended and they returned to their temporary quarters in the conclave hall, Lyra found Riven on the balcony overlooking Mirror Lake. "That was quite an announcement," she said. "You earned it. The position is real, fully funded, with actual authority. It's not a gift. It's recognition of what you've already proven you can do. And if I decide to leave when the contract expires, then you keep the position. It's independent of our marriage. I made sure of that." He turned to face her. "I meant what I said earlier. I want you to stay. But I want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel trapped by the contract or dependent on me for power. Whatever you decide, you'll have a place in this territory. On your own merits." Lyra's throat was tight. "You really mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean. You know that by now." She did know that. Riven was many things, ruthless, calculating, dangerous, but he wasn't dishonest. If he said she'd earned this position, she had. If he said he wanted her to stay, he did. "I need to tell you something," Lyra said quietly. "When I walked into the Bloodkeep a month ago, I was broken, desperate. I had no plan beyond survival. And I genuinely believed that I would spend 6 months performing a role and then walk away basically unchanged. And now? Now I'm not the same person. I'm stronger, yes, but it's more than that. I found something here I didn't even know I was looking for, purpose, power that I earned myself, respect from people who don't give it easily, and..." She took a breath. "And someone who sees me as an equal, who challenges me to be better, who gave me institutional authority independent of our relationship because he trusts my abilities that much." Riven's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes showed everything. I don't know if what I feel is love, Lyra continued. I don't know if I'm capable of that after everything that happened with Dorian, but I know that when I think about leaving in 5 months, it feels wrong, like I'd be walking away from something real and rare and worth fighting for. So what are you saying?
I'm saying yes. Renegotiate the contract, make it permanent. I want to stay. I want to keep building this partnership, this life, this version of myself that only exists because you saw potential where everyone else saw a liability. The distance between them disappeared. Riven pulled her close, his hands framing her face, and kissed her with an intensity that made her forget every strategic calculation she'd ever made. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I was prepared to let you go if you wanted to leave, but I'm very glad you chose to stay. Me too. They stood on that balcony overlooking Mirror Lake as the sun set, two people who'd made a desperate bargain and found something neither of them expected. Partnership, respect, power earned through survival and strategy. And maybe, eventually, love. 3 months later, Lyra stood in the newly established Office of Civilian Affairs, reviewing education proposals from House Frost's territory. She'd spent the morning in meetings with teachers, the afternoon negotiating funding with House representatives, and she had 3 more appointments before the day ended. It was exhausting, challenging, occasionally frustrating. She loved every minute of it. The door opened. Riven entered with 2 cups of coffee. Volcanic blend, still awful, but she'd learned to tolerate it. How's the education reform going? Slowly. House Frost wants more money, the teachers want more autonomy, and I'm trying to satisfy both while staying within budget. She accepted the coffee gratefully. But we're making progress. 3 new schools opening next month, improved teacher training program launching in 6 weeks. You're good at this. Better than anyone we've had in civilian oversight before. High praise from the Alpha King. Just facts. He set down his cup, turned serious. I have something for you. He handed her a document. Lyra scanned it. A legal amendment to their marriage contract, removing the 6-month expiration clause, establishing permanent partnership terms, equal authority in household and certain territorial decisions. Already drawn up? She asked. I've had Aldrich working on it for weeks. Just needed your final approval. He watched her carefully. Are you sure? Last chance to back out. Lyra picked up a pen. I'm sure. She signed on all the required lines, Riven countersigned, and just like that, the temporary arrangement became permanent. That evening, they hosted a small dinner at the Bloodkeep, just the inner circle. Thessa, Kestrel, Aldrich, and a few other trusted advisors. It wasn't a celebration exactly, more an acknowledgement of how far things had come. To survival, Thessa raised her glass, and to the woman who walked into our fortress with nothing but nerve and somehow became the best thing to happen to northern civilian infrastructure in a decade. To strategic partnerships that become something more, Kestrel added with rare warmth. To the Alpha King and his queen, Aldrich said simply. Long may they rule. They drank, they talked strategy and politics in the upcoming winter session, and through it all, Lyra felt something settle in her chest. This was home now. These people were her family. This work was her purpose. She'd walked into the Bloodkeep expecting to spend 6 months performing a role and walking away. Instead, she'd found herself. Found power she never knew she could wield. Found a partner who saw her as an equal and gave her the tools to prove it. Later that night, in their shared quarters, Riven pulled her close. Any regrets? About signing permanent commitment to the most dangerous man in 6 provinces? Absolutely. But I'll survive. She kissed him. I always do. Yes, you do. It's one of your best qualities. Lyra thought back to the woman who'd approached the Bloodkeep gates 5 months ago, desperate, broken, with nothing left to lose. That woman had gambled everything on a single desperate request, and won. Not just survived, thrived. Built a life from ashes, earned power and respect on her own terms, became someone worthy of standing beside the Alpha King, not because she married him, but because she'd proven through every challenge, every test, every moment of pressure that she belonged. The disgraced bride was gone. In her place stood Lyra Kylor, Director of Civilian Affairs, the Alpha King's wife, a power in her own right. And she was just getting started. Outside, the volcanic mountains stood eternal against the night sky. The Bloodkeep's fortress walls had seen generations of rulers come and go, but tonight they protected something new, a partnership forged in desperation, tested by fire, and proven through survival. A woman who'd walked through those gates with nothing and walked out with everything. And a future built not on contracts and strategy, but on respect, power, and something that looked remarkably like love. In the ruthless world of the Northern Territory, where only the strong survived, Lyra Vance had done the impossible. She'd not only survived, she'd conquered, and her story was far from over.